Chapter 444. It was fine when she was unknown, but when her name became widely known, a large number of spam messages annoyed her. She was young, beautiful, talented, and wealthy. With so many advantages, how could she not be talked about? Unfortunately, her ability only worked at night. There were almost no people who sang her praises in the middle of the night. Most of the time, one or a few perverted men would call her name in a corner, and then they would have all kinds of fantasies, and even do some more disgusting things. This troubled her for a long time. These people did not deserve to die, and they did not even have anything to do with her. They just took advantage of her verbally. She could not kill them with an arrow from a distance, could she? The number of these unscrupulous people increased as her fame grew. She could not go crazy and kill them all. She had no choice but to divert a part of her mental power to block the reception function of her ears. The super hearing of the Kryptonians was also blocked because there was too much information. The starting point was different, but the purpose was the same. The young lady could only choose to block it. Now, with the help of the Holy Sword, she could almost hear the calls and prayers of all living beings. When she wanted to unilaterally close the information channel, the Holy Sword stopped her, as if it wanted her to listen to what those people were saying. Are you sure? Thea had to withdraw from the deep meditation. Meditating in the midst of hundreds of millions of voices? She did not have the willpower to do so, and she believed that not many people could do so. The Holy Sword's message was very warm, like an elder's relative. It was not forcing her, but encouraging her to try. Let's try. The skyrocketing mental power made her in a surprisingly good state. She could generate tens of thousands of thoughts in an instant. These were not messy thoughts, but orderly thoughts. She was like a supercomputer, doing countless calculations in a second. She was confident that she could take on some difficult challenges. As a humanoid terminal, she began to receive information from all living beings. At first, the Holy Sword only opened a small part of the channel. Seeing that she could handle it well, it slowly increased the speed of information infusion. Alice, I don't know if you can agree to my date. Will Father come to watch my baseball game? God bless me to return with a full harvest. Countless requests poured into Thea's heart. Legend had it that the gods could respond to the calls of their believers and send down their power or avatars. At that time, she didn't think much of it, but now, Thea only lasted for half a minute before she wanted to curse. This was too tiring. She didn't need to do any further processing, nor did she need to make any response. Just the simple act of receiving the information caused her spiritual body to fall into a trance. Seeing that the Holy Sword had no intention of stopping, Thea could only continue to persist. Her clever mind quickly came up with a set of methods that were not really method. Many people did not have strong intentions and were considered dispensable. She put all of these aside and prioritized those who had strong intentions. Anyway, she did not need to deal with them. She listened to them as quickly as possible and moved on to the next one. Thea's spiritual power was rapidly depleting. At the same time, those who had strong desires seemed to feel that their prayers were being listened to. They were in a good mood and unknowingly returned a portion of their spiritual power. With this replenishment, Thea's total spiritual power was decreasing, but she could still hold on for a while. During this process, she also heard many familiar calls. For example, Shadow was begging them to hold on to the brick wall. Laurel wanted to see her sister, Luther's secretary. She hoped that Luther would spare some time to see her. Most of the people's wishes were good. Of course, there were also many evil wishes. Thea directly gave up on them. Just as she was sifting through the messages, a golden light entered her spiritual world. This was an unparalleled call. The intensity of the will and the sincerity of the wish surpassed the sum of all the wishes she had dealt with before. My brother and I are trapped in the basement by bad guys. The bad guys are on their way to kill my father. I pray that God will give me the power to save our father. The image of a young boy appeared in Thea's mind. The person's voice was not loud, but his attitude, will, and determination exceeded the traditional definition of power. This was the only voice left in the spiritual power channel. The combination of the war eagle and the white dove, Donald Hall? Then the one next to him is his brother, Henry Hall? Through the construction of the medical cabin, Thea collected information on many people. She knew the brothers. They were not big shots in the world. The older brother was good at solving problems with violence. In Thea's eyes, he was just an ordinary person. However, the younger brother, Donald Hall, was an amazing person. His combat strength was negligible, but his holiness was unparalleled. Even the black lamp that swept across the universe could not shake him. Thea shook her head and chuckled. It seems that the war eagle and the white dove in the future were also made by me. Interesting. Combining the causes and effects, Thea knew what she had to do. She summoned the unicorn, the symbol of her light and holiness. The unicorn's spiritual body did not take human form. They were telepathic and understood each other's situation. Come on, Arthas. Merge with me completely. From today onwards, we are no longer separate. The unicorn licked the corner of her eyes with its large tongue. Thea tugged at her ear. She did not feel good about not being able to see this cute pet again in the future. However, thinking that this was a fusion and not a parting of life and death, she steeled her resolve. Wiping the wet corner of her eyes, the unicorn also sensed her thoughts. The human and beast had already merged before, so they only needed to adjust the resonance amplitude. Come on! Thea completely opened her mind and welcomed the symbol of the future that fate had arranged for her. The fusion of the two spiritual bodies caused the space to tremble violently. The mountains, lakes, and forests formed by spiritual power were attracted by her and turned into pure origin power, providing power for the fusion of the two. Thea's consciousness was operating at high speed, leaving behind her power and origin power. As for the qualities and holy characteristics, they were wrapped up by her layer by layer, turning into a dazzling golden ball. This was the purest part of her. Thea believed that as long as she absorbed this golden ball, her moral character would undergo an earth-shattering change. Justice was good and people yearned for it. She could carry the whole world on her back and move forward. She had the courage, but Thea did not like that image. She did not like to be a pure and kind person. That was not her character. The brothers, especially Donald, are rare saints in the world. They should meet your standards. Thea seemed to be talking to the unicorn after the fusion, but also to herself. This time, the fusion was complete. She no longer had the golden helmet and golden armor. What followed was a drastic change in her life level. Perhaps she was still not as good as Superman Diana, but there were very few people on this earth who could match her. This golden ball was more or less contaminated with some of Thea's essence and a small part of the unicorn's ability. The power inside could completely change the Donald brothers. Chapter 445. Thea had wasted some time, but for the Donald brothers, not even a tenth of a second had passed. Following Donald's shout, before he could finish, a voice that was far beyond the limits of their imagination rang out in their hearts. Power, you desire power? Then I'll give you power. Thea did not intend to scare them, but she was too far away from the material world, so she could only communicate with them telepathically. However, she neglected the fact that they were just two ordinary teenagers, while she was not bound by her body, and her spiritual power had increased by 100 times, so the difference between them was unimaginable. Seeing that the two brothers were dumbfounded, Thea felt that it was a good time to throw the golden ball over from the other side of the passage. The golden ball automatically split into two parts according to her will and fused with the two brothers. The older brother, Henry Hall, received the larger part of the power according to his own wishes, while the younger brother, Donald Hall, received the heart of justice and holiness. The originally noble nature was now sublimated to a level that even Thea was amazed. This was not 1 + 1 = 2, but a qualitative change in faith. The soul of this young man named Donald Hall was overflowing with golden light. Even without testing, Thea could imagine that he was almost immune to soul magic and dark magic. It was too pure, and except for those who could not be named, no one could do anything to his soul. The two brothers both received the flying ability of adult unicorns, as well as physiques that surpassed ordinary people. The older brother received more power, while the younger brother received more virtue. When you're in danger, summon the war eagle and the white dove to awaken the power in your body. Go, do what you need to do. The flow of time between the two worlds was very different. One side flowed rapidly, while the other remained motionless. Thea had to do her best to stop the erosion of time, and it was very difficult for her to resist. She simply told the two brothers how to use it, and unilaterally cut off the connection. The noble qualities were not wasted, and the power was entrusted to those who needed it. Next, whether the two lived or died had nothing to do with her. They were not her family, friends, or subordinates, so Thea quickly put them to the back of her mind. Thea spent a lot of time fusing with the clone that represented the dark side. Thea's personality was more unique and unique. In order to extract her essence, Thea spent a lot of effort. Compared to the unicorn that represented light and justice, the dark element doppelganger was the one that resembled her the most. In order to prevent this part of her personality from being corrupted, Thea could only be extremely careful. Slowly, bit by bit, she analyzed the doppelganger bit by bit, leaving behind her mana and her elemental attributes. However, his several attempts to condense had all ended in failure. The magic power of the main body and the doppelganger was too deeply entangled. It was simply impossible to condense the magic power like the unicorn. The courage to do so. After failing for the third time, Thea reached out her hand and stroked the holy sword. She knew that it was time for her to make up her mind. As she waved her sacred sword, a large amount of magic power wrapped around her clone's personality and abilities were forcefully sliced out of her clone's body. There were no visual effects of flesh and blood flying everywhere, nor were there any heart-wrenching cries of pain. All that was left was the trembling of her soul. That was really painful. Thea's spiritual body had been severely damaged, and her total amount of magic power had been reduced by 20%. However, looking at the black mist-like object that was still baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the spiritual world before her, she knew that her work wasn't done yet. If she left it alone, this mist-like object would gradually grow stronger until it devoured this space. Then, if nothing unexpected happened, it would transform into a human form and return to the material world to madly seek revenge. No matter if it was Thea herself or the Holy Sword, she wouldn't allow this to happen. Thea stopped training her spiritual power and focused on dealing with the mist-like object before her. She couldn't give it to humans like she did with the unicorn. It contained a lot of negative emotions. Thea's idea was to create a dark element magic staff. However, she also gave it the meaning of healing. Logically speaking, such a contradictory concept shouldn't exist, but Morgan Le Fay's many spells had given her some guidance. This black magician who was proficient in healing took a different approach, combining the two extremes of magic with each other on the surface and the inside. This would be a magic staff of salvation. It would save others and also save oneself. Every time the user waved the magic staff to heal others, both the user and the magic staff would have a new experience. Thea extracted a portion of pure spiritual power from the space around her and used the Holy Sword's ability to turn illusions into reality to create the magic staff without any rest. The entire staff was dark gold in color. At the top of the staff, there was a golden snake curled up. Although it wasn't as good as Diana's forging ability, it wasn't difficult for her to make a magic staff. After an unknown amount of time, Thea sat down on the ground, exhausted. The magic staff was finished, but then came the problem. This was a part of her body. If she used it herself, it would return to her body in 2 days. All her previous suffering would be in vain. Then, who should she give it to? First of all, the user had to be of the dark attribute. Secondly, it couldn't be someone with ulcers on the head and pus on the soles of their feet. Lastly, it would be even better if the user was a woman. Through the holy sword, Thea opened up a spiritual power channel and listened to the wishes of all living beings. She began to search for the lucky person like an old grandpa. Facts told her that it was really not easy to be a qualified old grandpa. Some people had potential but no talent, and some people had talent but no potential. Without intelligent screening, without a search engine, she could only look around and try her luck. People who thirsted for power were everywhere. However, less than 1 in a million people had talent for magic. Thea didn't have the time to open the bloodline of those few people. She couldn't find anything after searching everywhere. She could only set her sights on the creatures of the small planes. She didn't dare to go to heaven or hell. People didn't want her magic staff that used the dark attribute to cast healing spells. Many intelligent beings in the interlayer spaces were her only choice. When her gaze swept across a small plane that was lower than the material world and higher than hell, a 3-headed, 6-legged monster with snake hair and 6 scarlet eyes attracted her attention. All kinds of negative emotions from hell filled this small plane. This place was filled with monsters formed by malice. Compared to these monsters, the one Thea saw was short and thin. Although its body was also formed by malice, Thea's spiritual power had increased by 100 times. She could still see a trace of light in it. This was probably the reason why the monster was so thin. Are you willing to help others? Are you willing to heal this world? Thea's question rang in the monster's heart. The monster was really shocked. It kept roaring, trying to scare away this invisible enemy. Can't you use telepathy? Thea was also helpless. She couldn't pretend to be an old grandpa anymore. She might as well just throw the item to the monster. Chapter 446. When the staff was about to leave her hand, Thea realized that she had to completely sever her relationship with the staff. From now on, the staff was the staff, and she was herself. It was best for them to have no connection. I am Asclepius, the god of medicine. You have the light that you haven't realized yet. You are worthy of redemption. I give you this staff. Save yourself, and I hope you can save the world. She did not leave her name, nor did she leave the names of Diana, the moon goddess, and others who were related to her. Instead, she borrowed the name of the god of medicine in Greek mythology. The son of Apollo, the god of light in the myths and legends, had never appeared in Thea's memory. Saving people with a snake staff was his standard image. Although she had used his name, it was a good thing. Presumably, he would not mind, right? On the other side, the snake-haired monster looked at the staff that fell in front of it. Its 3 heads searched up and down, left and right, but found nothing. Finally, it boldly grabbed the staff. Save the world and save yourself. You have woken up from the abyss dream. From now on, your name is Nurse Nightmare. The snake-haired monster was affected by the residual magic on the staff. Its illusory body gradually shrank, and a somewhat vague female figure gradually appeared. Thea left a sentence that confused her, and unilaterally closed the passage. Like the brothers Warhawk and White Dove on the other side, these 3 people were not her subordinate. Whether they lived or died in the future, it had nothing to do with Thea. What they could do was entirely up to them. Although her magic was damaged, her spiritual power had increased by a lot. Thea was a little surprised. She was no longer a noob. Such an increase for no reason could only mean that her physical fitness had improved greatly after the fusion, and it was reflected in the spiritual world. She could not practice her spiritual power anymore. Her main purpose had been achieved. She needed to return to the material world to adapt to her new body. Sorry to disturb you. I'll take my leave now. The blue-skinned old man who acted as a guide for the dead people had been watching from a distance. When she stopped, the old man slowly walked over. Thea thanked him politely. The old man was very kind. You're welcome as well. From now on, this will be your home. Even Thea could not stand it anymore. She had absorbed at least 1/10 of the remaining spiritual power in this world. However, she was not regretful and was even welcome to come again. This made her feel a little ashamed. He had the heart to repay something. A check? They were all spiritual bodies, so they were definitely useless. Gemstones? Similarly, he couldn't bring it in. Thea was a little worried. Looking at their lifeless city, she suddenly had an idea. Let's create something for them to pass the time. They had no use for the few pastimes of modern society, so Thea directly used her spiritual power to shape them and used the holy sword to give them life. She created a lot of small animals. What made her sigh was that the first small animal she had unconsciously made was a unicorn. She felt a little sad, so she hurriedly composed herself and made a lot of pandas, raccoons, huskies, and other small animals that looked very silly and cute. I hope these animals can bring you laughter. Before Thea left, she had already seen a few residents of the city looking at the small animals in fear. Then, there was a burst of exclamations. She did not stay for long. Following the old man's instructions, she left this world from one side. This time, there was no two-headed dragon to perform acrobatic flying. Almost as soon as she took her first step, her body was already outside. It seems to be north of Nandarbart Mountain? Thea was familiar with the mountain elder. She looked at the surroundings and determined her location. Now that she had removed her spirit form and returned to her physical body, it would definitely cause some strange phenomena. Thea quickly left the scene and stood in a nearby cave. Come! She held the holy sword in her hand and turned her wrist. The colorful brilliance of the sword instantly filled the cave. The body made purely of spiritual power quickly disintegrated. More than half of the spiritual power was rapidly changing its form. Ugh! The transformation was only halfway done, and Thea felt that the surge of power had exceeded her previous peak. Moreover, as her body gradually solidified, the power was still increasing rapidly. Only a short time had passed in the outside world, but in the halo, Thea felt like a whole day had passed. She stood up, panting, and stretched her body a little. The side effect of the sudden increase in strength was that she could punch a hole in the mountain wall with a casual punch, and a deep pit with a little bit of force in her feet. The benefits of high spiritual power came with it. Her control of her body could be said to be superb. She began to familiarize herself with the most basic punches and kicks. In less than 5 minutes, Thea had familiarized herself with her current body. The loss of magic power was more than she had expected. The sword had at least cut off 30% of the total amount of magic power. In contrast, her physical fitness had increased by 2 times. There was no clear hierarchy in this world, but Thea was familiar with the understanding that she was familiar with. She was barely able to divide it into a few stages. There was a benchmark here, and that was Diana. Her strength should be at the level of a high-level demigod. Before Thea merged with her doppelganger, she estimated that she was at the level of a beginner demigod. Now, even without magic power, she could be regarded as a mid-level demigod only in terms of physical strength. If she added all kinds of equipment and magic, the gap between her and Diana would be very small. She had absorbed a part of the divine power of Horus, Isis, Ares, and Artemis, the 4 gods. Logically speaking, she should be very powerful. However, in the actual battle, without using magic, she had been suppressed by Diana. She did not show how powerful she was at all. Until today, when she merged with her 2 doppelganger, she suddenly realized that her strength had always been in a state of dispersal. Now she had her true strength, or this was the strength she should have had. When she was a heroic spirit, she could wear the space ring, but she could not take out anything. However, all her clothes had turned into ashes. Now that she had returned to her normal body, she naturally did not have those clothes on her body. Thea looked at the indescribable position below her neck. She could tell that she was 1 centimeter taller. She did not have the effect of cutting her hair and washing her marrow. After all, her level was not low at all. The strength of her body was much stronger than that of the people on Earth. Just when she felt that there was nothing unusual, her eyes focused on her shoulders. Her long brown hair seemed to be shorter, and the color had turned into a dazzling golden yellow. She took out a small mirror and found that her originally light green eyes had turned dark green. She touched the top of her head and secretly rejoiced. Her hair was very soft, and there was no king's glory. She was still herself and had not become a strange girl. Huh! Thea's strange thoughts had not dissipated. She was a little surprised by the feedback in her blood. With the disappearance of the unicorn tattoo, her real talent that had been suppressed had awakened. Chapter 447. Brilliant colors appeared in front of her eyes. Even with a casual glance, she could see the traces of countless microorganisms and insects in the cave. With a little effort, she could see their internal structure. Plants grew tenaciously between the cracks of the rocks, and underground water flowed slowly in the mountain wall not far away. Thea blinked her eyes, and her vision returned to normal. With a thought, her wide-range vision was restored. The world in front of her was slightly different from what she had observed with the eye of Horus. Whether it was the color, the details, or the molecular structure of things, as long as she wanted to, she could see it all. The eye of Horus was gone. That was the only thought left in her mind. She was a little surprised, but more than that, she was happy. Her body returned to its original state after the heroic spirit transformation. In addition, she had merged with 2 doppelgangers in the process. The eye of Horus was completely absorbed and assimilated by her body during this process. From now on, there was no eye of Horus, only Thea's own eyes were left. Without the barrier between her body and her eyes, her spiritual power skyrocketed. Now, what appeared in front of her eyes was the real world observed by the divine eye. Without worrying too much about the changes in her eyes, Thea received the message from her bloodline. She understood her true talent. This talent was very complicated. It was not as simple and crude as Damien's and Old Ma's ability to deepen. It was also different from her previous unicorn tattoo. This talent had slightly touched on the level of rules. The balance of order. This was the name of her new talent. According to the bloodline, a golden balance would be erected in her spiritual world. The 2 sides of the balance represented order and chaos. There were many things that could affect both sides. Thea roughly read it with her spiritual power. There were hundreds of items, some praise and slander, some construction and destruction, some fairness and bias, and even some neatness and chaos. These things could all affect the measurement of the scale. When the order was heavier than the chaos, it would provide her with something called the power of will. The effect of this power of will was so great that there was no limit to it. It could change reality, distort space, turn nothingness into reality, stop time, and various other functions. However, the more heaven-defying the ability was, the more power of will it consumed. Order suppressed chaos, and the power of vow accumulated in the balance. When she extracted it, the balance would return to its original balance point, and a new round of measurement would begin. When chaos overpowered order, she gained nothing. She could only try her best to increase the weight of order. There was no punishment in this process, but there were also no benefits. She had to work hard to make order overpower chaos again. How troublesome! The thought that flashed through Missy's mind was, go back and buy the news media, then promote herself 24/7? Could it be that his company had transformed from a traditional construction industry to a high-tech R&D company, and now was going to enter a media company? That was a bit too big of a leap. Thea was a little embarrassed to buy the world's mainstream media. This idea could only be a joke. The country's system determined that the media had a lot of freedom. It was not uncommon for them to scold someone even though they were paid a salary. Some people even took pride in scolding their bosses. He couldn't buy that indescribable national media. Even if he did, they wouldn't say anything good about him. It was even more impossible for Al Jazeera to do business with him. This was just a beautiful dream. Thea observed the balance for a while. There were many people who scolded her, but there were also many who praised her. For example, the vast number of poor people who benefited from her medical pod. Quinn Group's medical pods were being spread all over the country. Surgeries that cost tens of thousands of dollars in big hospitals only cost a few thousand here. It was safe and efficient. Within half an hour, basic illnesses could be solved. This talent is really tailor-made for my personality. Thea couldn't help but sigh. She was used to making a fortune in silence. She was asked to do good deeds in public like a superhero. Today, she saved an old lady who ran a red light. Tomorrow, she would help a child find his dog. These were things that she couldn't bring herself to do. She was used to using the existing rules, maintaining the existing rules, and doing things in a planned way. She was not like a firefighter, running around the city and saving whoever she saw. To a certain extent, she and the superheroes had a conflict of ideals. Now that she had obtained this talent that emphasized order and priority, her ideals were further strengthened. She wanted to test the power of will. Unfortunately, both sides of the balance had just begun to move. There was only a little more order than chaos. The little power of will was not even as thick as a strand of hair. After calming down, she couldn't help but think about this strange talent. Although it was incomparably troublesome, its power was definitely extraordinary. She wasn't the son of God. With such a strong bloodline talent, even Merlin didn't awaken this level of talent when he was a wizard apprentice, let alone Damien and Old Ma. After eliminating a few impossibilities, the only explanation was that her true talent had always been suppressed and was constantly changing as her ability deepened. Or rather, her talent awakening had never progressed to the final step. When the unicorn tattoo was removed and this talent appeared, it was already so strong that no one could compare to it. Others awakened their talents when they were mortals, but Thea was forcibly suppressed until now. Purely from the perspective of talent, she was probably the first demigod-level wizard apprentice in history. She checked her body on the spot. Although she was in a cave, there was still light. She still retained her ability to absorb sunlight and moonlight. Otherwise, she would rather be a warrior if she had to practice 18 types of meditation techniques a day like Mr. E. She took out a set of clothes from the spatial ring. Between flying back or teleporting back, she hesitated for a second. She was afraid that it would be troublesome, so she chose to teleport. She didn't return to Star City or the metropolis. Instead, she went directly to London. Diana bought an apartment here as her residence. "Have you settled your matter?" Diana, who was watering the flowers, felt the spatial fluctuation and asked without turning her head. "My strength has increased greatly now. Let's compete." "It's still daytime. What are you thinking? Let's compete. Change your equipment and we'll find an uninhabited planet." Thea didn't allow any explanation as she pulled Diana and ran to an alien planet. Her physical strength could only be used freely in an intense battle. Diana helplessly put down the water bottle, carried her equipment, and followed Thea to an uninhabited planet. With a sword and shield in hand, fully armed was Diana's attitude toward battle. She wouldn't give up any equipment just because she underestimated her opponent. Thea knew this very well. She didn't use the power armor or buff magic. She just tied her hair into a single ponytail and didn't use the holy sword. Instead, she used the Godslayer that Diana was very familiar with. Be careful. Diana didn't take the attack head-on. She chose to dodge sideways. However, she underestimated Thea's speed. Just as she thought of dodging, Thea was already in front of her. Her competitive spirit was ignited. She also held the sword in her right hand and slashed at her. Chapter 448. The two swords were made by the god of fire, and had the same origin. No one knew how many times they had clashed. However, Sia, who had always been knocked back, had only taken half a step back this time. The strong wind created by the collision of the two swords swept across the area within a radius of several miles. "Your power has increased by so much?" As the person who knew her best, Diana was quite clear about her strength. The two of them had sparred countless times, and she was the one who had the most right to speak. "Indeed, this is the power that my body should be able to exert now." The benefits of the heroic spirit transformation were not only to train her spiritual power, but also to filter out the remnants in her body through the process of decomposition and reconstruction. The messy divine power that Thea had absorbed before came from different gods and even different divine systems. Although it was downgraded to magic power, there were still a lot of impurities in the energy. This decomposition and reconstruction was equivalent to remaking her body from scratch. There were no more remnants of Ares or Horus, and all the power belonged to her. Relaxed, soothing, and simple could be used to describe her physical condition. Even if it was just a simple comparison of appearance, she was not inferior to Diana. Objectively speaking, she was now like a new demigod. The effect of the reconstruction was heaven-defying, and the heroic spirit transformation was only one of the countless functions of the Holy Sword, and it was also one of the inconspicuous functions. From this, one could see how extraordinary the Holy Sword was. She needed to adapt to a new body, and so did her fighting style. It was like Batman knew Wing Chun, but he did not use it usually. This boxing style was not suitable for his burly body. Thea's skyrocketing strength was now facing the same problem. Many of the moves that used to be easy to use now felt strange when she used them. It was not the problem of the moves, but that she was no longer suitable for these moves. Diana did not hold back just because her moves were sloppy. She held a shield in her left hand and a sword in her right hand. She did not practice as many martial arts as Thea, and she was very familiar with a set of boxing style and a set of sword and shield attacks. Although Sia was very familiar with her martial arts, she was still flustered. Under the strong pressure, the martial arts she had mastered were also in a state of rapid integration. It was impossible for her to defeat someone with a move without a move. However, she was able to use the best moves of various sections. Whether it was the royal court swordsmanship or the Japanese swordsmanship, any move that was suitable for her was a good move. Get in the way. Sensing that Thea's strength was not much inferior to her own, Diana threw away her shield and held her sword with both hands, attacking like a storm. It turned out that Diana's overall strength was still higher than Thea's. Her strength, endurance, reflexes, and speed were all better than Thea's. The young lady could accept this fact. After all, although her magic power had dropped by 30%, she was still a mage at her core. It would be strange if a mage like her could fight against a pure warrior like Diana with her body. Based on her usual personality, she would have unleashed all her skills and fought for victory. However, after fusing with her two doppelgangers, she had gotten rid of all distracting thoughts. Her state of mind was very calm. It was no big deal if she lost, but it would be strange if she won. Move by move, she calmed her mind and tried her best to deal with Diana's attacks. From time to time, she would even counterattack. The two of them were fighting very seriously. Diana had not engaged in this kind of pure martial arts competition for a long time. In the past, Thea used to train with her using magic and martial arts. In the middle, she would add in fear impact from time to time. It was not the path of a pure warrior, which made her very sullen. There were not many people on Earth who could fight with her. Fiora could only be said to have known her through her relationship with Thea. It was okay to spar once in a while, but it was not okay to do so too many times. The two of them did not have such a friendship. As for Superman, Diana wanted to experience his skills. Unfortunately, Student Clark was so busy every day that his remaining spare time was filled by Louise. He did not have the time to spar with Diana. It could be said that after leaving the island for 100 years, this female demigod who was a warrior to her bones had been bored to death. Now that she saw that Thea's close combat ability had improved by leaps and bounds, in terms of happiness, perhaps she was not inferior to Thea. The two of them began to unleash their energy without restraint. One of them slashed a ditch with her sword, and the other punched a wind wall with her fist. On the desertified planet, rocks were constantly blown away by the aftershocks of their fight. The planet's atmosphere was also rumbling because of the aftershocks of the fight. It was as if a typhoon had wreaked havoc within a radius of 100 miles, and in the eye of the storm were the two beautiful ladies. The two of them fought for a long time. Even the demigod's body was a little tired. Diana took advantage of the moment when she turned around in the air to jump up and punch her. Thea realized that this might be her last punch. She also mobilized all the strength in her body. She twisted her waist and bent her arms. At the same time, she drew out a weak wisp of power of will from the spiritual world. She secretly said to herself, "I can do it, I can do it." A faint golden light wrapped around her jade-white arm. This light flickered slightly and disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Bang! There was a loud explosion at the point where the two of them collided. An invisible shock wave swept out in all directions with the two of them as the center. Diana fell back to the ground. Her feet plowed a deep trench in the heavily weathered ground. She retreated more than 10 meters. Thea was in midair. She somersaulted 7 or 8 times before coming to a stop in the air. What a strange power! Diana had fought with Thea countless times. She was very familiar with several kinds of power that she had. This was not magic power or emotional power. It was a bit like divine power, but not exactly. Let's go. We'll talk about it in detail when we get back. After Thea finished speaking, she changed her clothes. The clothes she was wearing earlier were all torn. With their current fighting strength, ordinary clothes would be torn apart in a few moves. This was also the value of Diana's armor. Not to mention its defensive power, its blocking effect was just perfect. They returned to Diana's apartment through a portal. The two of them were covered in dirt. They took a simple shower. Both of them were exhausted. They had been fighting all day long, so they did not have the energy to do it today. They ordered takeout for 10 people. The young lady took the large pile of food under the surprised gaze of the delivery man. The two of them sat on the ground and chatted as they ate, as if they were on Paradise Island. Power of will? This seems to be something described in the religious scriptures, right? Diana asked in a muffled voice as she swallowed half a pizza. Sia was gnawing on a drumstick in an unladylike manner. This food was really dispensable to them. If they wanted to replenish their energy, even 100 servings wouldn't be enough. They were just greedy for this little bit of food. Power of will is the name I gave it. It's like this. Thea blabbered on about the effect of the ability, hoping that Diana could help her think of ideas. Although she was not as good as Batman or Luther, Diana was also blessed by Athena's wisdom. She was also quite intelligent, but she was more used to using her fists to reason. Chapter 449. As a female warrior born in the Amazon, Diana didn't know etiquette at first, but after more than 100 years in human society, she had learned a little. She wiped the oil stains on her hands and counted with her fingers to think of a solution for her. I think there are a few ways to get credit. First of all, eliminate discrimination between men and women. I've been doing this for more than 10 years. If you were to do it, the effect wouldn't be much. Diana was really worried about this matter, and Thea did not have any good ideas. She nodded. This was the general situation, and it had nothing to do with wisdom. Secondly, eliminate war, save children, and pay attention to the vulnerable, provide them with some work opportunities, provide free medical treatment, help people below the poverty line. It was obvious that Diana had been paying attention to these social issues, but her words carried little weight, and she did not have a good way to promote this matter. Not only did she have a headache over these issues, Sia also found it extremely difficult to deal with them. To put it in an exaggerated way, if she took Moira's speech during the mayoral election, there were tens of thousands of words on it. Every politician had promised a bunch of things to the voters, but it was still the same. For thousands of years in human society, there were so many people in high positions and selfless politicians who could not do it, and the two of them, demigods, could not do it. Thea pondered for a moment. The national gene injection was definitely not possible, but some special drugs that could cure terminal diseases at the genetic level could be manufactured and put into the market at a low price to see the reaction. I think. She was just about to speak when she was startled by a palpitating heart. Something seemed to have happened in a very distant place. Diana's level was high, but a pure warrior's reaction to abnormalities was not as sensitive as her. She saw that she was halfway through her sentence and carefully felt the changes around her, but unfortunately, she did not feel anything. Our world seems to have a hole in it? Thea had secretly made a lot of arrangements before. She did not know which one was activated, but her intuition told her that it was a big deal. The two women did not have time to talk. They flew out of the atmosphere, and Thea looked into the distance. At the same time, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, on a small island in the Azores, the buildings that were originally full of indigenous style were crowded today. After the famous archaeologist Dr. Daniel Evans received mysterious financial support, he stole the trident of the Sea King Arthur Curry a few years in advance in the original time and space. He led a large group of media reporters to open the so-called Gate of Atlantis. What the reporters at the scene recorded was not a glorious era, nor was it a treasure of an ancient civilization. This middle-aged man with an elegant temperament opened a passage that had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. Countless giant creatures that had been sealed by the Atlanteans and the Greek gods were released from the passage. The cameras were pushed down, and a few reporters who were close to him were torn to pieces on the spot. The rest of the people ran away, but they forgot that this was a small island, and they had nowhere to run. The giant creatures did not touch Dr. Evans, who was already dumbfounded. It was not that they were merciful, but they wanted to continue mocking this upright middle-aged man. Thea saw this scene and secretly sighed in relief. Fortunately, when the barrier between the two worlds was broken, she sensed it. Otherwise, the casualties would be greater. She was the one who instructed the Court of Owls to transfer the mysterious funds that Dr. Evans received. Her purpose was to release the Greek hero Hercules, who was trapped on the other side of the passage, and obtain enough divine power of the earth attribute to establish a complete magic cycle. Although it was Dr. Evans who stole the trident, and it was the giant creatures who bewitched him to open the passage to the balance of order, she was also an important participant in this matter. The weight on the side of chaos was heavily added, and both sides were almost equal, which made her heart ache. She asked Diana to put on her equipment, and she hesitated for a moment. It was not time for her to officially stand in front of all the media, so she also put on her hood, and the two women were directly teleported to the small island. From the time the doctor opened the passage to the time when Thea and Diana arrived at the scene, it was less than 30 seconds, but the situation had deteriorated to the extreme. The giant creatures seemed to be playing with toys, and dozens of humans were torn apart by them at will. The smell of blood on the scene was extremely strong. "Stop!" Thea shouted. The two of them suddenly appeared, and most of the ordinary people were already scared out of their wits. They did not notice them at all, but the giant creatures knew what was good for them. The two women were pure demigods, and they could not help but be vigilant. However, it was the young lady who shouted for them to stop. In fact, she did not have the intention to stop at all. She just felt that it was inappropriate to start fighting without saying a word, so she shouted to strengthen the momentum. These giant creatures all represented the consciousness of chaos. Killing one of them was greater than saving 100 ordinary people. At the same time, the sacred sword also transmitted a strong fighting spirit to her. Thea immediately made a decision. Today, she would use these evil descendants of the giants as the beginning of the revival of the sacred sword's glory. Thea held the sacred sword with both hands, jumped 10 meters high, and stabbed the sacred sword, which was overflowing with 7-colored light, into a red monster with wings and a bloody mouth in the middle of its body. The eyes on the monster's 2 shoulders were still confused. "Didn't you say to stop? You were the one who shouted so loudly just now, right?" However, before he could express his dissatisfaction, the sacred sword had already completely purified him. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, she separately beheaded 2 more winged creatures. Diana had been cooperating with her for a long time, and she did not hesitate. Like cutting a melon, she cut down a colorful monster that seemed to have the ability to turn invisible. Shameless surface demigods. Kill them! The leader of the giant creatures was a female giant creature with a snake's body and long hair. Her entire body was dark green, and she had 2 wings and 4 arms. Their population was not large to begin with. When they were sealed 10,000 years ago, there were more than 1,000 of them. Now that they had broken out of the seal, there were less than 50 of them. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, 4 of them were killed by Thea and the others. This made the snake woman extremely angry. Visible ripples burst out from her blood-red eyes, and Dr. Evans, who was very close to her, was directly sent flying. Humph! Mental attack. Thea was very disdainful. This was her leftover skill. This skill was very effective against small groups of soldiers, and it was very cool to see a large number of them fall like wheat. However, it was not practical in a battle of the same level. No matter whether it was herself or Diana, both of them had extremely high mental resistance. If they focused their mental power on a single point, it might be effective, but if they spread it out in such a large area, the damage would be negligible. Realizing that the snake woman did not have much combat experience, Thea turned the footsteps that were originally aimed at her and exchanged 2 blows with a purple vine-like creature with mouths all over its body. This creature drilled in and out of the ground, and it took her some effort. She used a hard earth spell to delay the creature's drilling, and then swung her sacred sword and cut the creature into 3 pieces. She still felt that it was not safe, so she stabbed the creature twice more until it turned into ashes. Only then did she move on to the next enemy. Chapter 450. Surround them. Overwhelm them with numbers. The snake woman was obviously not good at hand-to-hand combat. She hid far away and began to command. From time to time, she would send out mental attacks, sound waves, and charm spells. As a few powerful monsters gave up on killing ordinary people and returned to the island, Thea and Diana were under more and more pressure. However, they did not complain. Thea felt that this was her fault, and she had no qualms about it. Diana felt that it was her duty to destroy these guys. The 2 women relied on their skillful martial arts and divine armor to deal with dozens of enemies. Their main targets were those who could fly and those who could turn invisible. They would kill these enemies first and deal with the remaining few who had thick skin and flesh. Be careful. Thea kicked Superman's good friend, Jimmy Olsen. Today, the Daily Planet sent this camera-turned reporter. This kid was really unlucky. The death-courting experts, Louise Ryan and Clark Kent, went to investigate another big piece of news. The newspaper office didn't believe that Dr. Evans could come up with anything new, so they sent the intern reporter to the Azores. This kid was indeed one of Superman's Iron Triangle. He was very lucky. There were not many people left on the island, but he was still alive and kicking on the front line. This guy was also very careless. He did not forget his job at all. He raised his camera and took pictures. The sound of his camera not only attracted the enemy, but also Thea. Seeing the enemy spit out acid rain, Thea could not watch this guy die in front of her. She gave up on the enemy and kicked him away. Stay away. Seeing that this guy wanted to ask a few more questions, Thea had to use Magician's hand to pull him away from the scene. She looked around and pulled Dr. Evans, who was holding a trident, to the side to accompany Jimmy Olsen. If you want to interview someone, you can interview the person involved. With the troublemaker gone, the battle had reached a stalemate. Thea and the others could no longer move as they pleased. The enemy had cunningly used a few large monsters to block their movement space. Fear had little effect on these evil and chaotic creatures. After the two girls worked together to slay a monster that could absorb life force like seaweed, they finally stood back to back, panting. Originally, their physical strength had not recovered after the battle, and now that they were in a bitter battle, they could only use 60% of their usual strength. It was extremely difficult for them to fight. Hold on, I think reinforcements are coming. Thea cut off a monster's arm with her sword. No problem, I can still hold on. Diana used a lasso to catch a monster, pulled it in front of her, and stabbed it to death. Stop. At this time, another roar came from the beach. Unfortunately, the monsters did not fall for it anymore. We may be naive, but we are not stupid. You humans have shouted for us to stop twice in less than 10 minutes. You want us to fall for it twice? How could this be? The group of people continued to besiege the two girls as if they didn't hear anything. What happened? Give me back my trident. The Sea King, Arthur Curry, who had swum for tens of thousands of miles, landed on the island like a god descending from the sky. The result of his loud shout was that no one cared about him. He was a little puzzled and happened to see Dr. Evans holding the trident. The middle-aged man also knew that he had made a terrible mistake. If the two girls had not jumped out to fight to the death, who knows what would have happened? He threw the trident back to the Sea King. Arthur, I'm sorry. You can kill me, but please help the two girls. They can't hold on any longer. The Sea King wanted to see who was being besieged, but the group of giant creatures surrounded him. He did not have the ability to fly, so he stretched his neck to look at the outside for a long time. He could only see that the fight was lively inside. From time to time, broken limbs of monsters were sent flying. He stood for a while, but no one cared about him. Arthur, come and help. He could not see, but Thea saw him with her supervision. Although he was not as good as Superman, he was still a strong general. Hearing Thea's voice, the Sea King breathed a sigh of relief. He knew the combat power of the two girls and knew that they would be fine for a while. There was no need for him to go in and save them. If they could not hold on, he would be a dead end. His combat awareness was good. He looked at the enemies on the battlefield and found that Thea and the girls were prioritizing those who could fly and run fast. He immediately understood the intention of the two girls. Thunder flashed on the trident, and he attacked a winged monster. Not long after he joined the battle, Mela, who was always by his side, also arrived. The island was not big, and it was surrounded by seawater. Her ability to control water was at its peak, and countless water and ice arrows rained down on the giant creatures. The continuous killing of the four of them was indeed extraordinary, but injuries were inevitable. Thea had taken off her hood, revealing her long golden hair. The hood could be used normally, but it blocked her vision when she was surrounded. Although she used all her power, her right hand was still injured, and she could only hold the sword with her left hand. The giant creatures were the descendants of giants and Gaia's evil consciousness. They had surprisingly high magic resistance, mental resistance, and physical attack power. They had almost no weaknesses, and Thea could not use many of her methods. She could only fight with brute force. If she had not merged with her doppelganger, which increased her physical attack power, it would have been more difficult to deal with these enemies. Diana wasn't having a good time either. She was injured by an arrow shot by an enemy that looked like a purple-skinned tree. There was a bloody hole in her sturdy thigh. The enemy's attack was extremely corrosive. Even with her demigod body, she couldn't recover from it and could only fight with a limp. If she had known, she would not have fought with Diana. Thea felt that after Merlin abandoned his sword, her luck was a little bad. If the two of them were in good condition, they would not have to fight so hard. Use the power of will. She alone had killed 7 or 8 giant creatures, and the order scale was very satisfied. After canceling out the matter of secretly supporting Dr. Evans, there was still a lot of power of will left. Recover our physical strength and injuries, Thea chanted silently. In a place where they could not see, an obscure white light shone, and the two girls' physical strength rapidly rose. However, their injuries were only half healed, and before they could fully recover, their power of will was exhausted. They threw 2 more healing gems, and more or less relieved their injuries. The snake woman had been observing the situation from the periphery. At this time, she smiled sinisterly, and her sharp teeth shone with a cold light. Greeks and Atlanteans? Do you think that only the giant creatures are your enemies? Too naive. I'll let you see a real nightmare, this friend who has been with us for tens of thousands of years, hee. Before she could finish her sentence, the entrance of the passage that they had escaped from was suddenly blasted open. Rubble flew everywhere and smoke lingered in the air. The violent reaction of divine power startled Diana. Sia hurriedly flew over to protect her, and only then did they manage to resolve the danger. Ah! Amidst the deafening roar, a muscular figure rushed out from the tunnel. Chapter 451. In front of a group of monsters that were a few meters tall, the 3-meter-tall man who rushed out was not conspicuous, but the power that overflowed from his body was enough to attract everyone's attention. The man's head and waist were wrapped in animal skin, and his naked upper body was full of explosive muscles. 2 ferocious dragon heads were used as shoulder pads, and through the animal skin, one could see his bearded face and a pair of crazy eyes. Even if one could not see his face, one could feel the oppressive feeling in the air. Hercules! Diana was really a little surprised. This was the interesting part of Greek mythology. Other than a few old ones, the rest were all brothers and sisters. They were all created by the loving Uncle Zeus. Whether it was Apollo or Ares, including Diana and Hercules in front of them, their mothers included all kinds of races and levels. There were mortals, demigods, and true gods, but there was only one father. Diana did not expect that other than Ares, she could see another living brother, who was very mechanically dealing with the attacks of the giant creatures. She looked at Thea. The Missy also pretended that she had just found out. She was 70% puzzled and 30% shocked. She was not a child of Zeus, so this expression was just right. Kill. Kill all of them. They are all traitors. Think about the despair you felt when they betrayed you and you were alone in the abyss. The snake woman did not dare to get too close to Hercules. She only used her charming voice to stir up his emotions from afar. Hercules' gaze became crazier and crazier. His chest was undulating, and the steel-like muscles all over his body were visibly bigger. Even from afar, one could hear his heavy breathing. Ah! Atlantean, I'm going to tear you apart. Hercules looked around. Just like when the Sea King first arrived, he did not see the 2 women who were surrounded by a few giant creatures that were as big as mountains of flesh. Instead, he saw the Sea King who seemed to be very muscular and was attacking fiercely with a trident in his hand. This guy must be his enemy. Without thinking, Hercules stomped his feet violently on the ground, creating a gust of wind as he raised his huge fist at the Sea King. The Sea King had heard Diana's exclamation before, and he knew that she was a god who was famous for her strength. If she had been an ordinary person, he would have punched her back with his fiery temper. However, he chose to avoid the mighty Hercules. His plan was very good. He wanted to build up his strength in one go, weaken in the second, and exhaust in the third. Unfortunately, he underestimated the power of Hercules. If he only relied on 3 axes, this son of Zeus, the Lion of Olympus, who was not favored by Zeus, would not have lived to this day. Having fought against the giant creatures alone for 10,000 years, his physical strength was almost limitless, and his martial arts had also reached the peak. Although he was now driven crazy by the giant creature's whispers for 10,000 years, his fighting strength was not affected in the slightest. The combination of punches forced the Sea King to retreat continuously. In less than 10 moves, he grabbed the Sea King and raised him above his head, intending to tear him apart. "Let him go!" The three women, for different reasons, came to the rescue at the same time. Mira's eyes were almost red, and ice arrows as thick as an arm rained down on Hercules. Diana also threw out the lasso of truth, binding one of his arms. Thea also took out the silver moon bow, knocked Zeus' lightning arrow, and shot an arrow at Hercules' chest as fast as lightning. The Sea King, who was raised in the air, was not completely helpless. His natural ability allowed him to control all aquatic creatures. When he saw a giant creature that looked like a catfish beside him, he did not care about anything else and directly took control of it. His ability was indeed powerful. The other party only resisted a little and was controlled. Then, it opened its bloody mouth and bit down on Hercules' head. Hercules only felt his vision go black, and his vision was covered by a stinky object. He wanted to tear this unknown object away, but his arm was tied up by Diana, and his body was shot by Thea. The familiar smell told him that the arrow contained his father's divine power. In addition, Mira had opened a few holes on his body, so he had no choice but to throw the Sea King out. After struggling for a while, Diana's strength was also not bad. She pulled the lasso tightly. Hercules' right arm did not move at all. He could already feel the giant creature under the Sea King's control biting his neck. He used his free hand to hit the giant creature's head. His heavy fists were like thunder, and every hit made a bloody hole in the giant creature's head. An unknown liquid gurgled out. "Very powerful. I underestimated you." The snake woman was still watching the show. She did not expect a blue lightning arrow to directly penetrate her chest. Before she could say a word, she was shot to death by Thea. "I've hated you for a long time, trash." Thea spat out a mouthful of turbid air. In the midst of the chaos, she shot 2 arrows. The one that was shot at Hercules was a simple arrow, while the one that was shot at the snake woman was a real lightning arrow with magic power. No matter how high their magic resistance was, they could not ignore Thea's strongest attack. Moreover, this fellow was only good at charm. Her own strength was weak. A big hole was opened in her chest, and she fell to the ground with a look of unwillingness. Without her secretly controlling and commanding, many of the giant creatures that were not so smart fell into chaos. Thea and Diana finally fought their way out of the encirclement. "Mira, come help me." "Diana, go help Arthur." They had basically killed all the giant creatures that could fly. The remaining ones were all ground unit. Mira's ice arrow was actually a physical attack. Together with Thea's lightning arrow, the two of them were most suitable to deal with the remaining giant creatures in the air. Diana was also eager to chat with this crazy brother. Holding a shield, she replaced the Sea King who was in danger. Thea was dealing with the enemies below while paying attention to Diana's battle. After a few glances, she discovered the problem. Diana's hands were tied, and there was a gap in strength. She was like a bowling ball, fighting from the east to the west, and then from the north to the south. Thinking back to the original time and space, the Sea King seemed to have defeated him underwater. She immediately shouted, "Pull him into the water, Arthur can defeat him underwater." The Sea King gave her a thumbs up, which meant that she had good taste. Thea began to continuously shoot arrows at Hercules' back. Diana's lasso showed its power again, and Mira also controlled a large amount of seawater to help pull. Some pulled, and some pushed. The cooperation of the three women was really good. Hercules' feet plowed 2 deep trenches in the ground. He roared repeatedly, but the 3 of them were determined to pull him down. No matter how angry he was, it was useless. Plop! Thea dug a hole under Hercules' feet. He missed a step and stumbled. Diana suddenly exerted her strength, and the Sea King also pulled with her. The two of them were like a tug-of-war, dragging Hercules into the water. "Leave this to me, you go help too," Thea said to Mira. The couple's combat power underwater was immeasurable. She was too lazy to go underwater, and these targets on land were left to her to deal with. This arrangement was the most suitable since she could gain glory and willpower. Chapter 452. Mela looked at the battlefield. There were only a few enemies left that could not fly. Her ice arrows were not very effective against these thick-skinned monsters. She nodded. "Be careful." With that, she leaped up and dove into the depths of the sea to help the Sea King with a graceful dive. Even though they were separated by layers of seawater, Sia could see the intensity of the battle below. The Sea King, who was almost invincible in the water, was blocking the Hercules. Diana could only do some supporting work, and with Mira also entering the water to fight, she was a little helpless. Diana was not worried that the Sea King couple would kill Hercules. She swam out of the water to help Thea clear the monsters on the island. Without Hercules' interference, and without the Snake Woman's control, these giant creatures that only knew how to destroy were no match for the two women who cooperated with each other skillfully. Diana used a trap, while Sonia used a holy sword. Diana used a sword and shield, while Sonia used a bow and arrow. The two of them could switch between melee and ranged attacks at any time. A monster fell to the ground every 10 seconds. The fewer there were, the less pressure the two women felt. Thea used her power of vow again to recover some of their strength and injuries. Finally, they killed all the ancient monsters. The sea in the distance was still rolling with huge waves. It was obvious that it would not be easy for the Sea King couple to take care of the Lion of Olympus underwater. However, Thea was not worried about them. As long as there was seawater, the two of them had almost unlimited recovery. Unless they were the kind of people who could kill in one move, not many people could defeat the Sea King underwater. Moreover, the deduction of a portion of Sia's research funds to support Professor Evans was caused by the Sea King randomly throwing the trident around, which was why someone had taken advantage of the loophole. The couple was destined to be in trouble this time, and Sia had only brought this matter forward slightly. The scene was a mess. Thea had purified the monsters at first, but later found that purifying also consumed some of her strength. She quickly turned off the purifying function. At this time, the central area of the island was full of monsters that had been killed by them. There were all kinds of monsters, and none of them were similar. Some were bleeding, some were bleeding, some were bleeding purple, and some were directly turned into stone. "You're the one from Quinn Group?" Jimmy Olsen, who was not far from the battlefield, heard that the commotion had died down. Together with Dr. Evans, he gathered his courage and came to observe. He had good eyesight and immediately saw Thea, who had taken off her hood. "You've got the wrong person," Thea replied without thinking as she was dealing the final blow to the monsters. Now that her hair had turned blonde and her looks had improved, Jimmy Olsen was still in shock and wasn't very sure. At the same time, he felt that it was a little beyond his imagination for a billionaire to come to such a godforsaken island to maintain world peace. However, he was still prepared to return and talk to his good friend, Clark Kent, about his near-death experience today. Thea used her supervision to observe the vicinity of the island. After confirming that there was nothing left out, they went into the water to help the Sea King couple. "We can deal with him." The Sea King didn't know what Thea was doing behind his back. He thought that the trouble this time was caused by himself. He was already very grateful to the two women for helping him clear the monsters on the island. If he didn't do anything, he would feel ashamed. He wanted to take down the big guy in front of him with his own strength. Originally, his strength had increased exponentially underwater. Now that there was some pressure, he was able to exert 1,000% of his strength. It wasn't that Hercules couldn't fight in the water, it was just that he wasn't used to being off the ground. One of their strengths increased while the other decreased, and they began to beat each other up, unwilling to admit defeat. The huge current was turned into a whirlpool by the two's powerful strength. The fishes and shrimps had long fled. Mela's eyes were emitting a blue light. Her superpower was used to the extreme. From time to time, giant monsters formed from seawater would pounce on Hercules. Looking at the crazy Hercules, Diana hesitated and asked Thea, "Can he still recover his consciousness?" Thea had thought about this problem before and made several plans. Now that she saw the real person, she only felt that it was several times more complicated than she expected. Hercules's will was as hard as steel. It was difficult for such a person to be corroded, but once he lost his mind, it would be even more difficult to recover. The snake woman who was shot to death by her arrow must have been corroded by thousands of years to slowly disintegrate Hercules's mind. Even so, she drove Hercules crazy instead of becoming a puppet under her control. From this, one could see how tenacious Hercules' will was. If we can subdue him, we can go to the Martian hunter. He is one of the strongest telepaths in the universe. Let's see if he has a way. If it doesn't work, I can try to use my power of will to see if I can change reality. Grodd's telepathic ability was more about control. When he was under control, he was a normal person. When he was no longer under control, he would still go crazy. The Martian hunter was the best choice now. Diana nodded silently, and the two returned their attention to the battle. After half an hour of fighting, the Sea King and his wife defeated Hercules with difficulty. Hercules' body was harder than steel, and his recovery ability was top-notch. The Sea King's trident left wounds on his body, but Hercules recovered very quickly. It was impossible to kill him. Relying on his unlimited physical strength, Hercules's last bit of strength was exhausted. The Sea King elbowed him in the face. Hercules' eyes were closed, filled with madness and murderous intent. This warrior who dominated the gods with his strength was finally knocked out due to exhaustion of his physical strength. The Sea King heard the conversation between the two women and happily handed Hercules to them. "Arthur, everything is my fault." The four of them carried Hercules, who weighed tons, back to the island. Dr. Daniel Evans apologized to the Sea King with a guilty look on his face. The four of them did not blame him too much. This person was not a bad person. He was just too focused on his own research and was bewitched by the giant creature. They came back to the place where the seal was broken. Originally, they could put the trident back and reseal it. However, when Hercules came out, he had completely destroyed the barrier between the two worlds, so the trident was useless. The three of them could fight and kill, but when it came to the matter of sealing, it was up to Missy. They looked at Thea together. Thea also did her research. The other side was equivalent to a different world the size of a town. Now that all the prisoners had been killed by them, there was nothing on the other side. It did not matter whether they sealed it or not. However, Thea still used her knowledge to redraw the sealing enchantment on the spot. Because the giant creature had been there for thousands of years, the air on the other side was filled with madness and evil. If they did not seal it, there would be a few more villains if those auras entered this world. The result of her rich theoretical knowledge was that she was familiar with it. It was easier than sealing the hole in Nandarbat. Using the original specifications of Atlantis, Thea quickly resealed the passage. Chapter 453. From now on, this island will be a forbidden area, and your trident will still be the key to unseal it. Under the watchful eyes of a few outsiders, Sia easily drew countless irregular lines. A purple energy lightly swept across the scene, causing the aura of madness and chaos in the air to immediately stop spreading. Diana and the others were fine, but Jamie Olsen and the other survivors were dazzled. They didn't know what was going on, but they thought it was awesome. As for the forbidden area that she mentioned, they still had lingering fears. No one was going to come to this broken island again, and whether it was forbidden or not had little to do with them. The surrounding sea was affected by their battle. The waves were still turbulent, and there were still countless whirlpools under the water. The warm-hearted Sea King called the survivors to board the ship, and they carried the ship underwater and left the sea. Thea and Diana said goodbye to the two and watched them leave with the survivors. The noisy island quieted down. Only the destruction of various energies and the flow of corrosive blood destroyed the little vegetation on the island. Lady Natasha first put a bunch of sealing spells on Hercules, and then put on a large number of high-tech confinement devices from the Heaven's Eye Society. Amanda could use these things to trap ferocious Wolfrob, so it should be effective against Hercules as well. Under layers of confinement, even if Hercules suddenly woke up, his violent counterattack would not be lethal. Thea first checked Hercules as if he was mentally ill, and then she picked the largest medical cabin and put him in. After scanning for a long time, the result was no use. The human's experience in treating mental illnesses was completely ineffective against him. This guy's brain was not damaged, but there was a problem with his soul. It could not be cured in a hurry, so she needed to go back and slowly think of a way. Thea told Diana to look after him. She still had to deal with the bodies of the giant creatures on the island. The bodies of these guys were extremely evil. If they were thrown to the hands of the Cold Flame Church, they could make at least 100 magic tools. They were all curses, chaos, and confusion. There were too many problems left in the world, so purifying them was the best choice. All the bodies were gathered together, holding a holy sword, and silently adjusting their state. Thea softly chanted the inscription, and the holy sword responded at the same time. A large amount of light gathered at the tip of the sword in an instant. Thea's own mana was rapidly transforming. This light was not the light of the illumination spell that any mage apprentice could cast. It was a spiritual light formed by the will of all living beings. It was the light of wisdom, the light of the soul. Thea had a feeling that if this light continued to upgrade endlessly, its final point might be the light that God said should have light, the first light that represented the entire world. Of course, she was only purifying the corpses of some monsters. There was no need to make such a big deal out of it. Even if her magic power increased by 10 times, it would not be able to reach such a level. Thea's current strength could shake the earth, but in the eyes of those powerful beings, she was not much stronger than a microorganism. She obediently withdrew part of her magic power. The entire island was shrouded in light. Not far from the island, the survivors and the Sea King couple also stopped what they were doing and stopped to watch. Nuclear bomb? Jimmy Olsen took out his camera and snapped 2 pictures. Unfortunately, the lens was filled with white and nothing could be seen. He could only ask Daniel Evans, who was beside him. Although he was a Ph.D. in archaeology, he was still a Ph.D. Jimmy felt that his experience today was similar to that of a movie. The protagonists survived all kinds of hardships, and then the government destroyed all the evidence with a nuclear bomb. It was no wonder that he thought so, because this was the plot of such movies. Evans had been an archaeologist for many years and had more or less come into contact with supernatural things. His Ph.D. title was not just for show. He forced himself to explain with his own worldview. It's definitely not a nuclear bomb. Maybe they want to sink the island to the bottom of the sea, or burn the corpses of those monsters. The Ph.D. immediately deduced 5 or 6 possibilities and said with lingering fear. The rest of the survivors also began to talk. Thea, who was on the island, did not know that she had become the focus of their debate. She only felt that her intention to fight secretly was completely ruined. As she injected her own mana into the holy sword, a huge beam of light was produced on the island. The beam of light with a radius of 1,000 meters shot straight into the sky. The overflowing light was reflected to the entire North Atlantic Ocean. Not to mention the satellites of various countries, even the nearby Spanish people in Portugal could see it with their naked eyes. The sea moved without wind, and countless fish floated to the surface. They did not eat each other, nor did they fight. They just enjoyed the rare peace. The seabirds were singing happily, and the eagles, who had always been at odds with Thea, also joined in. As the spirit of all things, humans more or less felt that something was wrong. Many people stopped and asked each other if they heard the sound of the Scottish bagpipes in the air. A few ancient temples deep in the mountains rang with the sound of bells, and many devout churches and monasteries vaguely sang a song. The media all over the world was alarmed, and several major religious organizations immediately claimed responsibility for the incident. The spiritual leader of a Central Asian country even spoke on the news channel for 1.5 hours, laying out facts and reasoning, just to prove one thing. He was the one who did it. The young lady did not know that she had not finished her work yet, and there were already a bunch of people waiting to take the blame. She only had one feeling at this time: this holy sword was too flashy. Even if her total mana was reduced by 30%, it was still far more than the current generation of mages. Even so, under the premise that she had reduced the power of the holy sword, her current mana was still consumed by more than half. Feeling that the light energy had been accumulated, it was more than enough to purify the bodies. Thea did not see how much force she used, but she held the sword with both hands and pointed the tip of the sword at the center of the pile of bodies. The beam of light was like an iron needle piercing a balloon. With the point of impact as the center, the space spread in all directions. All the places covered by the light energy quickly disintegrated, and the bodies of the giant creatures were like soup splashed on snow, quickly melting in front of her eyes. 2 of the giant creatures had been pretending to be dead, or it was a conditioned reflex, and they even shook their legs. Unfortunately, the melting speed was too fast, and their struggles were meaningless. They were disintegrated one by one, and the beam of light purified the evil in their hearts and bodies. Large masses of pure energy overflowed from these ancient evil objects and dissipated into the air. Thea leaned on the holy sword. She was sensitive to the magic in the air. Although it was still very thin, it was much richer than before. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Diana was not so sensitive. She thought that Thea was injured because of the previous beam of light. Before Thea could answer, a rough voice came from not far away. "Daughter of Zeus, your companion is fine, but she has purified those giant creatures. The whole world will benefit, but trouble will come with it. It's hard to say if it's lucky or unlucky." Hercules, whose face was full of stubble, slowly sat up. It could be seen that the restrictions were still in effect, but his originally crazy eyes were still a little turbid, but overall there was a bit of brilliance of wisdom. Chapter 454. You're awake? You recognize me, don't you? Diana was in high spirits and said happily. However, Hercules disappointed her. Because of her sword light, I only temporarily recovered a part of my consciousness. The burden on my soul is too heavy and I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to recover. If I leave this place, I will still be that crazy beast. Diana clenched her fist. Thea and I will heal you, Thea? Only then did she realize that Thea only said one sentence and didn't respond. This was too abnormal. She hurriedly looked back and saw Thea standing there with a slightly distracted gaze. She didn't say anything, as if she didn't see Hercules recover his consciousness at all. Daughter of Zeus, don't disturb her. The giant is the product of the giant and Gaia's evil consciousness. She purified the evil consciousness and Mother Earth, Gaia, is rewarding her. Hercules hadn't spoken for tens of thousands of years, so his words were a little unclear. However, Diana still understood. What Mother Earth, Gaia? She was a little skeptical. This was the original god at the level of Zeus's grandmother. Was she still alive? If Thea could hear Diana's thoughts at this moment, she would definitely reply that Mother Earth was no longer alive in the traditional sense. Thea was also proficient in theology and could even take the exam for a doctorate in theology. As the one who experienced it personally, she immediately realized that she had met Gaia. The other party's manifestation was very strange. It was between existence and non-existence, between existence and non-existence. At least at Thea's level, she couldn't understand the other party's state at all. It wasn't accurate to describe it as Gaia's consciousness. With Thea's narrow vision, she could only think that the other party had merged with the Earth. The manifestation now was more like a subconsciousness. The imagined day trip to the Earth's core, the small movie of the birth of the giant, the big reveal of the ancient myths, none of these were present. The other party's consciousness was very fleeting and mechanical, as if it had completed some kind of setting. It returned a large amount of divine power to Thea, and then disappeared, as if it had never been there. Missy couldn't wait to laugh 3 times. Divine power was very valuable, and such pure Earth-type divine power was even more valuable. Thea had originally planned to obtain some from Hercules, and she had even come up with several plans to do so. Now, she had no intention of planting anything. This mass of divine power was extremely pure. Not only could it activate Thea's Earth attribute, but it could also activate her own mana cycle. It could even restore her to the state before her mana cycle was split. This was much better than carefully starting from Hercules. Thea was very happy, but she did not immediately absorb it. Previously, the Holy Sword had caused too much of a commotion on this island, so they needed to immediately evacuate. Are you awake? When Thea's consciousness returned to reality, she also discovered Hercules' state. Diana explained to her in a low voice. Let's go back to my place first. I have more equipment there. Thea directly teleported Diana and Hercules back to the metropolis. As soon as they left the island, Hercules' expression began to distort. His eyes were wide open and his teeth were chattering. Release part of your consciousness, I will knock you out. Hercules, who was in pain, nodded slightly. Thea used her strongest spiritual attack and released a spiritual storm in his spiritual world. The strong man did not even make a sound and directly fainted. Thea did not have time to talk to Diana. She immediately checked. Using a hole that Hercules had specially opened, she extended her spiritual power in, trying to find the real cause of his madness. After searching for 3 minutes, Thea's forehead was sweating. The spiritual world of Hercules was too wide. Countless images of people filled it. There were praises, insults, love, and hatred. There were also projections of many legendary divine objects in his spiritual world, such as the golden apple and the golden fleece. Of course, there were also powerful enemies that he had killed. Thea's spiritual power saw the 9-headed Hydra. Its scarlet eyes peeped at her through Hercules' spiritual world from an unknown timeline. Thea snorted. It was just a stupid snake. She was no longer the naive person she used to be. She was not afraid when it was alive. Why would she be afraid when it was dead for so many years? She searched for a full 10 minutes. The spiritual world of Hercules was as vast as the sea. With her current spiritual power, it would be very difficult to search. Her spiritual power would increase exponentially if she turned into a hero spirit. However, the Holy Sword had released such an earth-shattering attack and needed to rest. It could not provide her with enough energy to turn into a hero spirit. Thea used the spiritual connection to find the Martian hunter and told him her intention to ask for help. You want me, an alien, to save an ancient god on Earth? The Martian hunter did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, he had been on Earth for many years and had heard many stories about Hercules. In his heart, if he could save Hercules, he would definitely be a great general on the side of justice. He did not say anything and said that he would be there soon. However, Thea and Diana waited and waited. After 4 hours, the 2 women finally saw the Martian hunter who would be there soon. This person had found a mission in the metropolis at the last minute. After that, he had disguised himself and sneaked all the way here. I say, Uncle Ranjan, you flew here in less than 3 minutes, right? You're too careful. Thea was now familiar with him and said teasingly. The Martian hunter glared at her. You were the one who did what in the Azores, right? What were you doing there? Thea bragged about her heroic deeds as if she was showing off her achievements. She was very magnanimous at the moment. Even Gaia recognized her achievements, which meant that she had done a good job. Naturally, the Martian hunter could not find fault with her. Realizing that this was the fault of the human scholar, he could only sigh. He's so strong. When he saw Hercules' height, weight, and muscles as hard as iron lying there, the invisible aura made the Martian hunter feel a little moved. Although the Martian hunter was good at telepathy, his strength was comparable to Superman's. The fact that Hercules could make him feel pressured already showed that Hercules was not ordinary. Thea explained what she had found out about the inquiry. Do you think that the giant creature still has an image in his mind? Yes, you call it the mind. We mages call it the spiritual world, and shamans call it the spiritual world. They're all the same. They're all the inner parts of intelligent creatures. Thea first unified the customary terms of both parties. Then, she continued, it's not necessarily just one. I think there are many different kinds of enemies from different periods that are polluting his spiritual world. It's just that he could rely on his iron will to suppress all the evil intentions. However, after tens of thousands of years of corrosion, his willpower has been disintegrated, and the evil intentions have jumped out to pollute his mind. The Martian hunter thought about it after listening. Some things were different from his worldview, but the general direction was similar. He did not dwell on it too much and began to examine it carefully. Chapter 455. Although Thea had obtained many techniques and methods to use the power of the mind from the Martian hunter, she mostly used her mental power to control it, which consumed her body. The Martian hunter, on the other hand, was different. This was his natural ability, just like Thea's order balance and the Sea King's control of aquatic animals. His telepathy consumed very little energy. In terms of numbers, he was much stronger than the current Thea. Even if he was not as good as the hero spirit, the difference was not big. With his natural ability and low energy consumption, his search was more efficient and faster than Thea's. There are indeed many tainted bodies of consciousness affecting his mind. What do you want to do? Uncle Ranjan, can you resolve it with your ability? It's difficult. I can try if there are only a few of them, but there are too many tainted things in his mind. Thea leaned against the wall and began to think. The other party was not her, so it was impossible for him to use the hero spirit to get rid of the impurities and preserve the essence. It was impossible for him to use any simple method. I'll do it with you. We'll use our own methods to get rid of as many tainted bodies of consciousness as possible before we can't hold on any longer. There was no good way. It was a little stupid, but the Martian hunter did not have any good ideas either. Let's do it. The Martian hunter's consciousness entered first, and Thea followed behind him. The two of them split up to search for the tainted bodies of consciousness. Thea soon saw a three-headed hellhound that looked like it had been skinned. It was not difficult to defeat this thing in the spiritual world, but it was much more troublesome to completely destroy it. Thea shot the monster dead 3 times in a row, but it just shook its head and stood up again. The tainted bodies of consciousness were too closely connected to Hercules' main body. Every time it died, it consumed Hercules' consciousness. Simply killing it was meaningless, and there was even a tendency for it to worsen. Thea looked at her abundant willpower and took out 1/10 of it. A bright white light shot out from the spiritual body's finger and flew straight into the hellhound's body. The Cerberus body turned sluggish in an instant, and with a series of pixelated ripples, the Cerberus collapsed completely, reverting back to the consciousness of Hercules. Staunch, tenacious, brave, this small consciousness had almost all the qualities that a warrior could have. In a flash of light, it turned into a Hercules who had shrunk countless times. He held a sharp axe in his hand, nodded at Sia to express his gratitude, and ran to the other side. It seemed that there was a natural connection between the consciousness and the contaminated consciousness. Thea followed closely and soon found another contaminated body. The one holding the axe was fighting with the contaminated body. Looking at the power of will in her hand, Thea saw that it had consumed almost half of the power of will. Without any hesitation, she sent the power of will into the polluted body. Just like the previous scene, a body of consciousness with two swords in its hands jumped out again. Very good. This was purification, turning the enemy into one of their own. With one less enemy, their own side would gain one. This was a battle in the spiritual world. If it was in the real world, the other side would have gone crazy. Not caring about the consumption of power of will, Thea directly transformed 18 contaminated bodies, leaving some power of will in case of an emergency. She signaled for the others to move freely. She had already discovered that these positive bodies were different from their external spiritual power. They could completely kill the contaminated bodies. Perhaps this was the common saying, whoever started the trouble should end it. She hurriedly ran back to the entrance. Her spiritual power and power of will were almost depleted. She had to retreat. Halfway through, she saw the Martian hunter showing off his power. In the spiritual world, the Martian hunter showed his true form. He had green skin, a purple cloak, and scarlet eyes. If one only looked at his appearance, this guy had the temperament of a villain. His spiritual body was more aggressive than Thea's. Realizing that conventional methods could not kill the opponent, he chose a new method. In this spiritual world, he used his powerful talent and understanding to forcefully dig out a deeper spiritual space. Those contaminated bodies of consciousness were all beaten half to death and then thrown in. It would be best if they could survive on their own, but if they couldn't, it could be considered a temporary quarantine. This method was not bad. Sia's eyes lit up. Sure enough, each of them had their own tricks up their sleeve. The Martian hunter was indeed a master of telepathy. Hercules was not an ordinary person. He was a god with a will as strong as iron. Not many people had the ability to punch a hole in his indomitable spirit. The battle between the wills was like a tug-of-war. If one side was weak, the other side would naturally rise. As the contaminated consciousness kept being locked up, Hercules' main bodies will finally responded. More positive bodies joined the battle. Thea, who had originally wanted to retreat, also helped to fight. After half an hour, the Martian hunter, who had the support of his talent, could not stand it anymore. There were too many enemies. He firmly sealed the deep spiritual space and asked Thea to retreat. "How are you? Are you okay?" Diana, who could not help at all, asked nervously when she saw that the two of them were a little tired. "It's better than expected. It's all thanks to Uncle Ranjan." Thea did not take the credit. The help provided by the other party was much greater than she had expected. The Martian hunter was really exhausted. His psychic ability was strong, but his recovery was not fast. Unlike Thea, who could rely on fear and emotions and could recover easily, he needed time to slowly recover. "Thank you for your help." Hercules, who was in a coma, had already woken up. At this time, his consciousness could be said to have suppressed the negative emotions. If he wanted to fully recover, he would need a few more treatments. If he was not stimulated, normal communication was no problem. The few of them briefly introduced each other. Hercules was very polite when he was normal, especially when he saw that the three people in front of him were not weak. Diana was not to be mentioned. The daughter of Zeus was also not bad. Thea was also a strong person in his eyes. If she was in his era, she would be a demigod hero. The Martian hunter was the one who attracted his attention. Hercules did not know that this guy was afraid of fire. In his eyes, the Martian hunter was simply impeccable. Whether it was the strength of the body or the power of the soul, they were perfect to the extreme. Was this the current Earthling? What do you mean by luck and misfortune? Diana asked hurriedly when she saw that he had regained consciousness. Previously on the island, they did not talk about it in detail. Diana had long wanted to ask. Hearing this, Thea and the Martian hunter turned their attention. Thea was busy purifying, and did not know that they had a short conversation before. The giants will has returned to Gaia. The world's barrier has become thin. This means the gods are about to return. Chapter 456. The Return of the Gods. The three of them were a little horrified. The Martian hunter was an alien, and he could only say that he knew about Earth's mythology. Most of the so-called knowledge here was the knowledge that Diana had popularized to him. Thea could perceive that the magic content in the air was increasing. Although it was only a flash in the pan for the long existence of Earth, it was distributed among 6 billion people. She also associated it with the emergence of mutants in the next few years. She didn't believe that it had nothing to do with this matter. Diana was only left with shock. It was a surprise to occasionally see a brother, but if there were hundreds of them, she would go crazy. Although she had been in human society for many years, with the broadening of her vision and the change of perspective, she was no longer very convinced that the idea that Ares was behind the human wars. But deep-rooted thinking was not so easy to change. She was 30% expectant of her brothers and sisters, 60% fearful of them, and there was still a feeling that she couldn't explain. Haha. But you don't have to worry. Not all of them are interested in this world. It takes time to wake up from the kingdom of God and accumulate strength to come here. The lion-like man laughed heartily, suppressing the malice in his body. He now felt unusually relaxed and couldn't help but say a few more words to them. He seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little more serious. But a long time ago, there was a prophecy that the eldest son of Zeus and Hera would step on the corpse of his brother to ascend to the throne of the Father God. This prophecy corresponds to all the children of Zeus. Amazon girl, you are also in the prophecy, so you have to be careful. After that, Hercules laughed self-deprecatingly. Zeus, that coward who likes to play tricks, his father Kronos overthrew his grandfather, and he overthrew Kronos. Now it's his turn to be overthrown. Ha! Hercules had no respect for his father. It was as if he was talking about an unimportant passerby. But it was not his fault. Zeus, the main god, was too philanthropic. He had created a huge pantheon by himself. 80% of the heroes, demigods, and true gods in Greek mythology were related to him. This big boss was too good at creating. Troubled times, Thea had to sigh. Compared to the new gods in the Apocalypse Star, the ones who were about to jump out now were the old god. They could barely be regarded as minor problems. Their divine power was weak, their abilities were easily restrained, they had almost no power of faith, and their personalities were particularly strange. Now was not the ancient times. As long as they did not jump out at the critical moment, the Earth's current power was not afraid of them. The only thing to worry about was the firstborn. This was Diana's strongest opponent in the original spacetime. Thea estimated that this firstborn, who even Zeus was afraid of, was stronger than Diana and Hercules. He was the first child of Zeus and Diana. Unlike Diana and Hercules, who were only demigods, he was born as the most powerful god. But as Hercules said, there was still some time. The so-called arrival of the gods sounded scary, but in fact, it was just a few gods who did not give up trying to make their presence known. Hercules wasn't prepared to explain too much. Perhaps it was his personality that didn't like to talk too much. He didn't waste any time talking nonsense with them. He lay down on the ground, wrapped himself in a tattered animal skin, and fell asleep. He did not treat himself as an outsider and directly made a bed on the floor of Thea's laboratory. The three of them could only walk out. What is the level of the gods that he mentioned? Will they harm the Earth? The Martian hunter asked the two girls in a low voice. Diana looked at Thea and saw that she had no intention of explaining. She could only answer herself. According to what I know, their fighting power will not surpass Hercules. If they harm the Earth, then it's hard to say. The gods' thinking is different from ours. The Martian hunter did not comment. He only told the two to be careful and left alone. In the next few days, Diana did not return to London. She stayed in the metropolis. On the one hand, she wanted to talk more with Hercules and learn more about the inside story. On the other hand, she was afraid that he would suddenly attack and Thea would not be able to handle it alone. Thea was also afraid that something would happen to Hercules and that it would affect his fighting power. She did not directly absorb the divinity of Gaia. Instead, she was going to wait for him to get better. Unlike Diana, who could slack off in her work, she had disappeared for a month. She had a lot of work to do. In the past, she could send her doppelgangers to attend some boring banquets and meetings. Now that her power had increased, but her doppelgangers were completely gone. She could only do it herself. In a certain banquet hall. Haha. The young lady was wearing a sapphire blue dress and silver high heels. She covered her mouth and chatted with several female counselors in a very ladylike manner. In the banquet over the past few days, the focus of the discussion had been the aurora on the Azores. The few of them talked a lot, saying all kinds of things. Aliens were attacking the Earth, the government's new weapons, and some kind of treasure had appeared. There were all kinds of theories. Even Sia, the initiator of all this, felt that there was a hole in their head. She felt that someone was watching her. She turned around slightly and saw the dark-skinned Amanda standing not far away. She was giving her a look. She smiled and said goodbye to the few idle people. Then, she walked toward Amanda. Both of them were smiling. When they reached a place where no one was around, Thea put away her dignified manner. "Big sister, what's the matter?" Amanda looked at her with a half-smile. Thea's skin was as thick as a city wall. She was not moved at all. "You're the one behind the Azores incident, right?" "Yes." Ever since the shocking light beam of the Holy Sword appeared, Thea did not plan to hide it. The battle had lasted for more than half an hour. Not to mention the reporters at the scene, the satellites of various countries would have captured some footage. As her strength increased, there were fewer things she was afraid of. "One of my scientists was doing an experiment at the time. Because of your righteous act, he became like this." Amanda handed Thea a tablet as she spoke. On it was a real-time feed. However, Thea did not see anything strange after looking at it for a long time. A high-end laboratory? What was she supposed to see in the dark? Knowing that she didn't understand what she meant, Amanda was shocked when she first learned the truth. In layman's terms, he's invisible, but according to our equipment, he's still in this room. His body has mutated, and now he can absorb all light. If I'm not mistaken, the main culprit is your light beam. How is that possible? Nothing is impossible. This Dr. Wright loves to study all kinds of light. Cosmic rays. When you were messing with the light beam that attracted the attention of the world, he seemed to have caught a trace of. Amanda said, a little depressed. Chapter 457. Despite Avatar's convincing explanation, Thea was still in disbelief. What a joke. That was the light of purification from the Sword of Victory and Oath, the supreme holy sword of Celtic mythology. Now you're telling me that a human scientist captured a ray of light through technological means? This was not light in the traditional sense. This was the light of wisdom, the light of desire. What kind of technology could capture this kind of light? She had planned to fool Avatar, but now Thea's curiosity was piqued. She had to see this rare thing. Avatar wanted to use her knowledge to heal her subordinates, while Thea wanted to see this strange scientist. The two hit it off and soon arrived at the headquarters of the Heaven's Eye Society. Other than Laura Michaels, the only other person who came to greet them was a black man, Dr. Mist. This man was covered in light green magic circles and wore a red cape. He looked serious and unsmiling, standing there like a statue. Even Avatar, who was his direct superior, did not look at him, let alone an outsider like Thea. Thea found it funny that he was pretending to be an expert. The man's ability to reflect all spells was a joke to her. He would not be able to withstand any spell that was slightly more powerful. However, since he was a member of the Heaven's Eye Society, Thea was in no position to comment. "This is the place." Laura led them to a room. When she pushed the door open, the room was even darker. Thea guessed that the man was being assimilated faster for some reason. Save me. This thing is eating me." A middle-aged man's voice came from the room. However, his voice was very faint, as if he was talking through a blanket. Thea quickly left the place. Avatar and the others did not know what she was going to do, but they quickly followed her. After walking for a few hundred meters, Thea stopped. She looked into the distance and heaved a sigh of relief. "What's wrong? Is it going to explode?" Avatar could not help but think. Thea was stunned for a moment before she realized that they had misunderstood her. She found it a little funny. "It's not an explosion. I don't know how he did it, but I do have something to do with your doctor's condition. If I get too close to him, his assimilation speed will start to accelerate until he becomes a beam of light. No one can help him. He can only save himself. Have him design a costume that produces light so that he can absorb it. After that, it would be best if he stayed in a dark room." "What should we do now?" Amanda asked. "Use your strongest searchlight on him. When the light energy in his body accumulates to a certain level, his body will regain its balance. Don't worry, it's not a big deal. I'll be leaving first," Thea said casually. On the way back, she felt that it was very strange. This unlucky guy who had absorbed the light from the holy sword was probably Dr. Light. Thea was really curious as to how the other party was able to collect such extraordinary light. Was this also a sign of the coming of the great era that Hercules had mentioned? Realizing that her purification had caused a lot of chain reactions, Thea felt that the incident with the Heaven's Eye Society was not a coincidence. Perhaps something had happened to other people in other places that she did not notice. She sat in her office and ordered the artificial intelligence, "Organize all the strange things that have happened in the past few days." Gideon searched quickly. Various hospital archives, traffic reports, forum news, and gossip were quickly recorded. Thea browsed quickly. A homeless man died in a high-end conference center? Isn't this? Injured people in a zoo, 3 dead and 7 injured? This doesn't seem to be a big deal. As she browsed quickly, a piece of news finally caught her attention. 3 days ago, 2 hours after Thea released the light beam, meteorologists believed that the ocean currents in the North Atlantic Ocean were disturbed. The originally calm sea surface was affected and kept accumulating energy. When this energy moved to the east coast of the United States, it turned into a downpour and a thunderstorm hit the metropolis. A very famous radio host, Leslie Wales, stubbornly took a helicopter to do a live broadcast on that day. The strong storm destroyed the helicopter. At the critical moment, Superman stepped forward and saved the woman. Unfortunately, she was really unlucky. After Superman pulled her out of the helicopter and landed on the ground, a bolt of lightning struck Superman. Superman reacted quickly and pushed her away in a tenth of a second. However, he did not expect that there was a wire next to their feet. The lightning in the sky passed through the wire and struck the broadcaster. Student Clark, who was struck by lightning, was fine. He did not vomit blood nor did he transmigrate. However, Leslie Wales, who was not far away, did not have such a physique. She was electrocuted on the spot and died not long after being sent to the hospital. Thea shook her head and smiled bitterly. She was really a butterfly this time. When she flapped her wings in the Azores, there was a thunderstorm in the United States. Based on her intuition, Thea felt that the woman was not dead. There was no breath at that time. It was just the process of her body readjusting. Dr. Light was closely watched by the Sky Eye Society, so it was difficult for her to make a move. However, this woman was not a problem. Her ability was very similar to the Electric Man from Marvel Next Door. She could control and absorb electricity. With more effort, she would be a useful subordinate. She picked up the phone and ordered Death Knell to move the woman's corpse out. Half an hour later, Thea saw her target. She had to admit that it was a bit tragic. Her whole body was carbonized. Her clothes hung on her body in pieces and her hair was all white. The person who dealt with the corpse did not pay much attention and only roughly wiped it. She could barely tell that it was a woman from the appearance. Is there something special about this person? But she seems to be completely dead. I've seen her program before. It's not bad. It's a pity. Death Knell leaned on the table and asked. Not to mention that he had seen it, Thea had also seen the program hosted by this lady. In order to cater to the market and attract attention, she scolded Superman every day. Many people, such as Thea, had secretly watched it. She suspected that Batman had also watched it. Lex Luthor also watched it on time every day. It was not easy for ordinary citizens to count, but she had a place in the hearts of superheroes and villains. From the big picture, this woman was vulgar and unscrupulous. In order to curry favor, she could be said to be unscrupulous. She was definitely not a good person in the traditional sense. In fact, thinking about it carefully, one could also see her helplessness. She came to a place like the metropolis alone to make money and become famous. If she did not have proof and a resume, who would hire her? After several considerations, she chose to be a streamer. The next step was to choose a target. This program had to have a selling point, right? This woman's characteristic was that she was good at sarcastic. Who was she sarcastic about? Sarcastic about Thea? Sarcastic about Luthor? Half an hour later, she was put in a sack and thrown into the river. She did not dare to scold these people in power. At this time, Superman, who was also very famous and would not take revenge on her, entered her sight. Once the program was broadcast, it was indeed well received. Miss Wales seemed to have found a golden finger. Following that, she could not stop scolding Superman until today. Chapter 458. Thea's supervision allowed her to see inside her body. As a biological symbol, her blood circulation had been completely destroyed by the raging electric current. All her organs were basically carbonized, and only her heart and lungs were still beating slightly. This was the result of the residual electric current assimilating with her body. However, this process was extremely slow. In theory, she would be able to come back to life in 17 or 18 years. Of course, this was under the premise that her body had not been buried or destroyed by someone. Taking into account the fact that she was thrown into the morgue alone without any attachments, it was obvious that she would not have survived if she had followed the original path. This woman was similar to Poison Ivy. Both of them had external objects entering their bodies, causing irreversible changes in their life forms. The only difference was that Poison Ivy's life force was too strong, while this woman's life force was too weak. Connect her to the nutrient solution, max output. Thea signaled Death Knell. 3 thick needles were inserted into her severely necrotic skin, and various nutrients were injected into her almost dried-up body. 10 minutes later, Thea saw that her heart was wrapped in a layer of electric current, and it began to beat slowly. Does she have any abilities that are worth your attention? Death Knell asked thoughtfully. She can control and absorb electric current. When the electric current in her body reaches a certain level, her explosive power and speed will increase by a large margin. She can shoot out electric shock waves, and she can move between charged objects at high speed. Thea roughly explained a few points that she had thought of in a short period of time. Oh, that sounds good. But she must have some weaknesses, right? Of course. After gaining power in a short period of time, her mentality will definitely be unstable. Another is that she is extremely afraid of water. She can easily wipe out a fully armed American army, but she can also be defeated by a group of kindergartners with water guns. Seeing that Death Nell's expression was a little ugly, Thea hurriedly changed her words. Kindergartners are a little exaggerated, but the fire brigade can definitely defeat her. Then you still intend to recruit her? Thea did not answer immediately. The electric lady was the kind of person who had both advantages and disadvantages. Even without a great scientist, those who had studied for a few years would know how to deal with her. However, the other party's advantages could not be ignored. Now, the densely packed electrical equipment in the city would provide her with a huge amount of energy. Her mobility and destructive power were unparalleled. Thea thought for a moment. She'll be a great assistant if she's trained well. Oh right, she'll probably need to be trained for a few days. I can't stay here for too long. I'll leave the ring with you and return it to her when her arrogance has worn off, Thea said as she handed Death Nell an imitation yellow light ring. As evening came, the electricity lady's carbonized body continued to crack. Her charred skin fell to the ground and shattered. The newly exposed skin was almost transparent. The place where the blood vessels should have been was now replaced by electricity. Where am I? The electric lady sat up in a daze. First, she clenched her fists and looked at the electric current passing through her palms. Then, she looked around in shock. In the distance, there were dozens of fully armed burly men standing upright. They were all equipped with various instruments that he did not understand. A certain organization's base. This was her first thought. Had she become an experimental subject and been modified in various ways? It was no wonder that she thought so. American movies were full of such plots. It was hard for her to not go astray. Miss Leslie Wales, do you still remember what happened before? I saved you. Otherwise, you would be lying in the morgue right now. Thea saw that her eyes were a little unfocused. However, she did not scream like a lunatic. Thea felt that this was good news. You are? The electric lady's gaze automatically skipped over Death Nell, who was 2 meters tall and had a body like a bear. This was not because Death Nell was weak. In the original timeline, he was known as the greatest enemy of the young Titans. Death Nell, who was the nemesis of the brats, was no joke. Carrying 2 swords on his back and looking fierce, if it was in the past, he would have scared the former streamer out of her wits. However, today, the electric lady's gaze was still attracted by Thea. Unlike Diana's classic martial style, Thea had entered the middle stage of the demigod realm. Her appearance was more in line with modern aesthetic. Coupled with her rich knowledge, her overall temperament was raised by another level. Even as a female, it was rare for her to have feelings of jealousy. It was just that Thea would usually use magic to change some details in public so that her appearance would not be so stunning. Now that she was in her own base, she did not need to use magic to hide her appearance. What she showed was her original appearance. You know me, right? There were some differences in the details, but the overall appearance was the same. The electric lady's body had been modified. Her vision and hearing had improved greatly. She asked with uncertainty, "You are that billionaire? Are you the one who caught me here? None of you rich people are good people." Her tone was normal at first, but no one knew what she was thinking. As she spoke, she became so angry that her voice became shrill. The lights in the base flickered because of her. What should I do? She seems to hate the rich. Death Nell watched the show happily. He was not worried that she would go on a rampage and kill him. Now that his agility and strength had surpassed the limits of a human, he was not afraid of any metahumans. Moreover, this was a person who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, just because she had some abilities. Thea did not comment. The electric lady did hate the rich, but it was more of an electric current that affected her emotions. She could not control herself. I am a god. The electric lady became angrier the more she thought about it. What little rationality she had left was replaced by a crazy electric current. Her eyes rolled back and she floated in the air. The electric current in the base was crazily converging on her body. A few guards seemed to want to rush in, but they were stopped by death knell. Thea was speechless. This guy was different from Dr. Light. Dr. Light was a middle-aged man with a wife and children. He had a happy family and a good income. He was a middle-class person. This broadcasting lady was not doing well. She had been looked down upon by all kinds of people in her life. If she was not taught well, she would definitely become a villain. Blue light flickered between Thea's fingers. Water shield technique. A layer of aqua blue film covered her body. Amidst the violent electric sparks, the former broadcasting lady could no longer maintain her elegant posture. She fell to the ground like a salted fish. Her whole body was trembling. She had been short-circuited. Why can't you listen to me? I told you, I'm here to help you. Think about your previous experience. If it wasn't for me, you would have been dead. Thea squatted beside her and said slowly. The electric lady was not sure if she was speaking the truth, but she felt weak all over. It was true. The raging electric current disappeared, and her cautious personality appeared again. She had never seen magic before. She thought that Thea had done something to her body. That was how it was portrayed in movies. Thinking that she had become a fish on the chopping board, she became completely obedient. She showed a fawning expression and waited for Thea to continue. Chapter 459. Good girl, stand up on your own. Don't make me do it myself. Thea was taller than the lightning lady. She stroked her hair as if she was petting a cat. The lightning lady's body was numb. She had already forgotten that she was shouting that she was a god a minute ago. She stood up trembling like a quail. Thea waved her right hand and used a simple water extraction spell to suck away all the remaining water on the lightning lady's body. Seeing such an unnatural scene up close, Miss Leslie Wales did not dare to act rashly even though the electric current in her body was running again. Very well, control your temper. What I want to say is that you're not a god. You're just a lucky guy. If it weren't for my help, you'd still be in the morgue. Me? As her mind cleared, she finally recalled the electric shock. Superman didn't save me? Thea laughed. This was the typical attitude of the citizens of the metropolis. They usually scolded Superman loudly, but when something happened, they felt that Superman should save them. How much did they pay him to be a nanny? It could be said that these people were spoiled by superheroes. Unfortunately, Superman didn't save you. Of course, his ability doesn't include healing. At that time, you were already in a state of suspended animation. He didn't notice. The lightning lady looked at the surroundings. It was creepy no matter how she looked at it. She asked hesitantly, "Can I go now?" Thea laughed. "What do you think?" The lightning lady's emotions rose again. She gathered a large amount of electric current between her hands again. "You can't stop me." Thea looked at her watch. She still had to eat with Diana later. She really didn't have time to waste with her. She signaled Poison Ivy, who had just walked over, to deal with her. She walked out herself. "Don't go." A dazzling electric light struck Thea's back. This kind of attack was scattered and messy. Thea didn't look back. She directly set up a magic barrier behind her. It blocked the electric light without any ripples. The aqua blue teleportation door opened. She stepped through it and left the underground base. Where did she go? Thanks to the huge amount of information in the current society, a living person just disappeared right in front of her eyes. She had only seen such a bizarre thing in novels. Could it be that the portal just now was? No one answered her question. A huge plant emerged from the floor and wrapped her up in 3 layers. "Poison ivy, you broke my floor again!" Death Knell said speechlessly. Poison Ivy, who was walking over from afar, shrugged her shoulders and didn't seem to care at all. "Is this woman our new companion? What a bad temper. I'll leave it to you. I still have things to do." Death Knell threw a ring to Poison Ivy. Thea left it behind. "Give it to her when the time is right." Seeing how Death Knell ignored her and walked away, leaving behind a woman with green skin and red hair, Electric Lady felt that she was being looked down upon. "Don't go." She tried to release the electricity around her to burn this strange plant that was binding her. However, she miscalculated. Poison Ivy's plant wasn't from Earth but from a peace-loving, high-tech planet. It didn't have any special abilities other than absorbing electricity. It could absorb anything that was related to electricity. Poison Ivy didn't intend to use it in battle and only kept it for fun out of curiosity. Now that it had come in handy, even she was surprised. "Ah! Let me go. Let me go if you dare." No matter how hard Electric Lady released the electricity, the plant in front of her looked half dead, as if it would turn into charcoal in the next moment. However, after 10 minutes, Electric Lady's continuous discharge was a heavy burden on her body. She didn't know how to communicate with plants, but she could observe that the plant in front of her had undergone many subtle and indescribable changes. Poison Ivy was overjoyed. The joy of the plant was her joy. She was still cheering for Electric Lady. "Continue, don't stop." Thea left Electric Lady's violent temper to Poison Ivy's slow-witted temper. She was prepared to teach her a lesson. She shouldn't always think that the heavens were number 1 and she was number 2. The prosperity of the metropolis had returned to normal. The citizens on the streets and alleys resumed their daily lives. Thea left the underground base and was currently shopping crazily with Diana in a nearby store. Both of them were extremely tall. With their height and good figure, they could always wear long skirts as short skirts. Even though many of the clothes looked good, they couldn't fit the two of them. This had always been their problem. Of course, the young lady could call 100 assistants to buy clothes for her, but Diana enjoyed the pleasure of shopping, so she followed them out without a care. Long-sleeved ladies' blouse, round-collared autumn and winter long-sleeved wool coat, casual professional trousers, spaghetti straps, miniskirts, long boots, and various high heels. They didn't care if it was useful or not. Both of them bought a huge bag. "You're out shopping too? What a coincidence, what a coincidence!" The two of them bought a huge pile of clothes. The clothing store owner personally escorted them out of the store. They bumped into Clark Kent and Louise Lane. Diana habitually greeted them. The two of them didn't expect to bump into each other on the street. After all, no one had supervision and super hearing 24/7. Although Thea had changed slightly, her overall appearance hadn't changed. Those who had seen her before could still recognize her. On the surface, she and Clark knew each other, but they weren't close. However, Diana shouldn't know Clark. Louise Lane turned her head to look at her boyfriend in confusion. Then, she looked at the extraordinarily handsome Diana. Her mind was filled with questions. "I'll explain later." Bro Superman smiled sheepishly. Seeing that Thea and Louise were about to leave, he quickly stopped them. "Thank you for saving Jimmy. It's my treat. Let's have dinner together?" Louise seemed to have thought of something but didn't interrupt. The two girls looked at each other. They hadn't eaten dinner yet. "Let's have a big meal together." Clark Kent wasn't a poor man. His family owned a farm, so he didn't need to hire anyone. He alone could take care of 10,000 people. In the metropolis, the Daily Planet wasn't a street tabloid. By reporting first-hand information about many superhumans, Clark received more bonuses than the editor-in-chief. He held a very high position in the hearts of the media workers. Otherwise, the scene of Luthor urging him to shake hands with Bruce wouldn't have appeared in the movie Dawn of Justice. Aside from his identity as a hero, Not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry was qualified to shake hands with a billionaire. There were even rumors that this year's Pulitzer Prize would be awarded to him. Louise Lane was a stealthy rich woman. Because of her father's fame, the merchants didn't dare to take her money for fear of being captured by her father for human experiments. Plus, after working at the Daily Planet for so many years, she spent little and earned a lot. It was hard for her not to be rich. Chapter 460. They found a high-end restaurant and chatted as they ate. Were you the ones who saved Jimmy? Are you all superheroes? Did you know him before? The him Louise was referring to was naturally Clark. Her IQ wasn't low, and being a reporter was a profession with strong analytical abilities. Superman had specifically mentioned Jimmy's incident, and connecting all the clues together, it wasn't difficult to discover the truth. Louise knew Superman's true identity, but she didn't expect that there would be a superhero among the people she knew. Furthermore, he was a billionaire. Her only question was whether both women were heroes or if one of them was. Thea and Diana looked at each other and nodded. Louise could be said to be the closest ordinary person to a superhero. Her father and her boyfriend knew about Thea's true abilities, so it was not unacceptable for them to tell her. Oh, Louise suddenly realized. So, you really saved Jimmy? Who's Jimmy? Diana did not know who Jimmy was. Thea saw that the restaurant was quiet and no one was paying attention to her. She reached out and tapped the table lightly. With a water mirror image, Jimmy Olsen's image was reflected. Diana looked at the image and felt that it was familiar. Oh, it's him. He's quite a brave person. Thea pursed her lips. This was called being dumb, okay? This was not bravery at all. Louise was completely convinced when she saw this. She curiously tapped her finger on the water mirror. Her finger was clean and there was nothing there. Seeing that they were open about it, Superman sighed in relief. What were the enemies you encountered on the island? Jimmy took a lot of pictures. Were they aliens? These things had been explained several times, and Sia was very familiar with it. She told him everything from the beginning to the end. Superman sometimes frowned and sometimes pursed his lips. When he heard that the enemies were all wiped out and that the Justice faction had one more Hercules, he felt much more relaxed. What Thea said had little impact on Superman. Whether it was gods or evil, it was the same to him. However, these things were a little unsettling to Louise. The Greek gods, the will of the world, and the Atlanteans were all contrary to her original worldview, especially when she found out that Diana was the daughter of the King of Gods, and that there was another well-known god who was currently recuperating in Metropolis. She was completely at a loss for words. Poseidon. Hercules. Superman was a little excited when he heard these names. Unlike the Martian Manhunter, who had lived for hundreds of years, Superman was still a young man according to the age of the Kryptonians. It was inevitable for him to be competitive, but he also knew that it was not the right time to suggest a fight, so he suppressed the urge. Now that they had a preliminary understanding of each other, it was easy to chat. Thea was mainly concerned about Superman's recent encounters. Superman was a little puzzled when he mentioned that some unknown forces had been attacking him with missiles recently. Thea pretended to be puzzled, but she knew that Luthor had started to collect Superman's genes to make clones. To clone someone like Superman, whose genes were perfect, required a lot of preparatory work. Even with the help of the Kryptonians who had surrendered, Luthor's workload was so heavy and cumbersome that it made him lose a lot of hair. It should be known that Earth's current technological level could only clone some animals. Even someone like Sia, who had scoured space for scientific and technological knowledge, could only clone ordinary people. Mr. Luthor was too careless. He directly went for the most difficult one and chose the hell difficulty as the starting point. Sia did not know what to say, but this person actually succeeded. It was truly shocking. As for the missiles that attacked Superman, Poison Ivy controlled the plants and collected some samples without anyone noticing. Thea only took a few glances to know that Luther was the one behind it. He had installed a lot of nanomachines on the missile warhead, coupled with invisible kryptonite needles. He was using these things to silently collect Superman cells. At present, only Thea and Luther had the technology to use miniaturized equipment and knew how to use kryptonite. Since it wasn't Thea who did it, it went without saying who was behind it. When Thea saw the nanomachines picked up by Poison Ivy, she realized that Luther had mastered the atomization knowledge she revealed on the spaceship. This man was really amazing. Although he didn't understand a lot of things at the time, he remembered everything Thea said on the spaceship and went home to study it. Just by looking at the nanomachines he made, she knew that he had put in a lot of effort. The only good news was Luther's personality. He was arrogant, proud, and wanted everyone to look at him. This personality determined that he wouldn't study the atomic suit. He wanted to make an indomitable robot and beat Superman to the ground. He wouldn't become invisible to a microscope to deal with Superman. The Atomic Man's philosophy and personality were too different from his. If one day he really became invisible and unknown, he would rather die. The four of them chatted, and time passed quickly. When they said goodbye to each other, Diana hesitated for a moment and said, "I want to fight with you." Diana was unusually serious when she spoke. Thea immediately realized that she had been holding this sentence in her heart for a long time, but she just couldn't find the opportunity to say it. She believed in Diana's strength and didn't stop her. Instead, she quietly waited for Superman's response. Louise also realized the seriousness of the atmosphere. In her impression, Superman was synonymous with invincibility. She was a little excited that someone was going to challenge him today. The right to choose fell into Superman's hands. According to his heart, he wanted to fight to his heart's content, but there were too few enemies on Earth that were worthy of him fighting. The comfortable environment had eroded the warlike nature of the Kryptonian in his blood. Tonight, he first heard the story of their battle with Hercules, and then Diana wanted to fight with him. The passion in his heart finally suppressed all his worries. "Okay, I promise you, but the venue of the battle." "Thea will definitely think of a way," Diana said affirmatively. Ideas flashed through Louise's mind. Space combat was the most environmentally friendly. Although both of them could survive in space, Diana obviously wasn't good at space combat, so this option was directly rejected. If they fought on Earth, Superman could continuously absorb the energy of the yellow sun, which was also unfair to Diana. Plus, the various satellite observations were too troublesome, and they caused a lot of damage to the surface. Thea felt that the two of them could deviate the planet's orbit. For the sake of the 6 billion people, Earth was also rejected. The only option left was to go to outer space. Where to go? It was best to go to a place where there was neither a yellow sun nor a red sun. That? Can I go and watch the battle? I haven't seen him fight with all his strength yet. Louise Ryan gave Thea another difficult problem. Superman stared at her with bright eyes. His meaning was self-evident. Thea scratched her head. There were so many restrictions, and it had to be a planet where an ordinary person like Louise could survive. Chapter 461. After much consideration, they took out the light ring to search and finally found a barren planet. The planet was extremely far away from the star, and there were no signs of life. Even if the two of them deviated the planet's orbit, they were not afraid. Most importantly, there was oxygen on the planet, which was suitable for Louise, an ordinary person who was not afraid of death. After telling them about their discovery, Superman and Diana naturally agreed. They had wanted to fight for a long time, but there were too few suitable battlefields. Go to another planet? How do we get there? Louise's worldview was about to collapse as she hurriedly asked her own question. Don't worry, there's oxygen there, but there's not enough light. It's a little cold. After saying that, Thea gestured for them to go to a more secluded place. The distance was a little far, so the preparation for the teleportation would take a little longer. Calculating the distance, positioning the space, establishing a connecting passage, strengthening the magical power, stabilizing the space turbulence. This kind of long-distance teleportation was much more troublesome than teleporting inside Earth. The lady took out her staff, and a magic circle painted with purple stripes gradually appeared on the ground. Although she did not understand what it was, the highly educated Louise still felt a very complicated geometric beauty from it. "Alright, do you want to change your clothes? It's best if you put on your battle suits and Louise's winter clothes." Thea only thought of this when she was halfway through the magic circle. The three of them nodded in unison. Sia opened 2 portals for them, and they went back to their own homes to change their clothes. She also told them to hurry up and come back before the portals disappeared. After that, she lowered her head and continued to work on the ultra-long-distance teleportation. Louise stepped through the portal uneasily. The first time she encountered this kind of spatial displacement, she was shocked. When she came to her senses, she realized that she was already at home. She touched the tables and chairs in her house. There was no mistaking it. This was her home. She then looked back at the portal that was glowing blue. "What kind of ability is this? Do you have this ability?" She grabbed Superman, who was looking for her winter clothes, and asked nervously. The honest young man shook his head, indicating that he did not have this ability. Seeing that his girlfriend wanted to ask more, he could only explain, "Thea's ability is mysterious. It's different from mine." "That tall woman is no match for you, right?" Superman didn't dare to answer this question casually. He thought about it seriously and said, "I haven't fought her before, so I don't know. She is a very powerful warrior. You won't get hurt, right? It's too dangerous, so let's just forget about it. I don't think I'll lose. This battle is necessary because I'm also a warrior." Superman, who had always been obedient to his girlfriend, said resolutely. Louise understood his personality, so she naturally wouldn't try to persuade him anymore. Hearing her boyfriend say that he wouldn't lose, she felt much more relieved. Her worries disappeared, and the reporter's interest in gossip reappeared. He rubbed his chin and asked, "The relationship between the 2 women is?" Superman was not that gossipy. According to what he knew about the Kryptonians were born through genetic modification. Relationships between men and women were normal. There was nothing to be surprised about. He quickly changed into his blue clothes and red cloak, then put on a down jacket for Louise. The 2 of them hurriedly stepped through the portal. The moment he stepped through the portal, his attention was attracted. At this time, Diana had changed out of her flaxen short skirt. Her long hair was let down, and she was wearing her signature Greek-style armor. She carried a sword, a shield, and a silver guardian bracelet on her back. She was quietly waiting for them. The 2's fighting spirit reached its peak in an instant, but they were still worried about Earth, so they forced themselves to hold back. "Okay, let's go in. This is a deserted planet named Ilaru according to the universal name. It's 5 light-years away from Earth and 24 light-years away from Krypton." Thea finished drawing the portal. Unlike the blue portal that could be opened easily on Earth, this portal was purple in color. Just maintaining the portal consumed 20% of her magic power. After checking it carefully and confirming that there were no mistakes, she walked in first. Diana followed closely behind, and Superman comfortingly pulled Louise into the portal as well. The few guys with extraordinary physiques did not feel anything, but the ordinary Louise suffered greatly. It was as if she was thrown into a washing machine. Her body was fine, but her brain felt like it was violently thrown out by centrifugal force. She could not tell if it was dizziness or pain, but she felt like she was floating when she walked. It was similar to being drunk. Fortunately, Thea's magic power was far better than before. She woke up as quickly as she fainted. She shook her head and began to observe the surrounding scenery. This was a dark planet. The clouds were thick, and only a few rays of light shone on the ground between the gaps. There was no vegetation to be seen with the naked eye, and the sky seemed to be covered in sand. The environment was worse than Arabia. The only good news was that there was oxygen here, but it was very thin. She tightened her coat and came to Thea's side. She asked curiously, "There's no sun here? You said it's 5 light years away from Earth." There's actually a star shining here, but it's very far away. Plus, the star has entered a period of decline." Looking at her nonchalance, Louise could not help but ask, "Aren't you worried about your partner? Will Miss Prince be in danger?" Thea shook her head and did not answer the question. Logically speaking, no one could defeat Superman without kryptonite. However, Diana, who was also wearing a full set of godly equipment and had reached the peak of a demigod, was only one step away from becoming a true god. Thea did not think that she would lose. She was actually looking forward to this battle. Seeing that she had no intention of continuing the conversation, Louise also held back her desire to speak. She only glanced at Thea's short skirt and short sleeves. Thea was dressed like she was shopping. She was a little speechless when she compared herself to her trembling in a down jacket. Thea was secretly amused. If it were anyone else, they would have already gone back. However, this curious woman had no intention of backing down. She was currently staring at the two people in the distance with shining eyes. "Are you good at aerial combat or ground combat?" Superman floated 3 meters above the ground and asked politely. Although Superman opened the battle calmly, Diana still read something new in his word. He was putting psychological pressure on her. She immediately retorted, "Do you prefer to fight with weapons or bare-handed combat? Then let's fight according to what we're good at." Realizing that his opponent did not want to engage in aerial combat with him, Superman was a little disappointed. As for weapons, there was no Superman's sword in this world. He did not use any weapons. He flew directly into the air and looked down at Diana. He knew that his opponent was good at defense. This meant that she wanted him to attack first. He did not hold back. His legs suddenly stopped in the air and angled down at a 45-degree angle. He maximized his speed advantage and rushed toward Diana as fast as lightning. Diana did not use her sword and shield directly. After talking with Hercules for a few days, her martial arts had improved greatly. According to Thea's original words, she already had the intention of gaining the upper hand after making the first move. At this time, seeing Superman rushing at her, she was extremely calm. She quickly judged the opponent's several attack points. When the two were about to come into contact, she sidestepped to avoid the first wave of impact. Chapter 462. Then, without waiting for Superman to stop, Diana stretched out her hands and grabbed Superman's red cloak. Using all her strength, her feet, knees, waist, and arms, she spun a few times on the ground at high speed. Then, she suddenly released her hands and smashed Superman onto a rock. Boom! With a loud bang, more than half of the mountain that was hit collapsed. Rocks flew everywhere, and a strong vibration was transmitted to the ground. Thea and Louise, who were miles away, could feel the obvious vibration. "Will Clark be okay?" Louise asked nervously. Thea had supervision and was very engrossed in watching. Only then did she realize that Louise couldn't see anything even though she was craning her neck. She used magic to control the ground under her feet, to fly into the air, and cast a long-distance vision spell on Louise. After thinking about it, she still had to ensure Louise's safety when the two of them fought until the sky fell and the earth cracked. Louise was watching a battle of this level as an ordinary person. If it were someone else with fewer tricks up her sleeve, they wouldn't be able to protect her. Thea used her light ring to conjure a small house. The two of them sat in the house and watched the fight outside. Thea was very proud of her conjuration. Even Superman's full-force attack couldn't break it. It was more than enough to resist the aftermath of their battle. This level of wrestling couldn't even be considered a warm-up. Only Louise showed a panicked expression, but when she saw Thea's calm face, her nervousness gradually subsided. Superman didn't stay in the mountain for long. He smashed the surrounding rocks with a punch, flew up, and fired a heat ray at Diana from afar. The two of them were miles apart, and the heat ray wasn't fast enough to catch them off guard. Diana took 2 steps to the side. The heat ray hit the ground and vaporized the hard black earth instantly. However, Superman didn't stop the energy output of the heat ray. He shook his head slightly and swept to the side. Diana immediately realized that she had miscalculated. The extent of the opponent's head swing was much smaller than her dodging movement. She pushed off with both feet, switched the shield to her left hand, and charged forward while enduring the heat ray. She tried to close the distance between them. The heat ray hit the shield and made a sizzling sound. Although this was a high-energy ray converted from the solar energy in Superman's body, it was still a little weak in front of Diana's divine shield. Diana didn't just blindly fight back. She made some feints from time to time while running. She switched back and forth between straight and diagonal lines and tilted her shield. She tried to attract Superman's attention with some small tricks. Realizing that Diana wanted to engage in close combat, this was exactly what Superman wanted. He stopped shooting heat rays and grabbed a mountain rock that weighed several tons with both hands and threw it at Diana. Such a large rock, even if one ignored the force it carried, the huge kinetic energy it carried was extremely powerful. The rock was huge and fast, sealing off Diana's left and right paths for her to dodge. Retreat? Diana's unyielding character made her never consider retreating, especially in battle. Even if she knew that it was not good for her, she still chose to face it head-on. She stomped hard on the ground and leaped into the air like a sharp arrow. The boulder hit the ground, and the powerful kinetic energy produced a magnificent shock wave. The planet that was originally full of ditches was smashed into a large crater. However, no one cared about the planet. Superman firmly seized the opportunity and increased his speed to the peak. He approached Diana in the roar of the sonic boom. Diana's weakness of not being used to aerial combat made her a little slow. She could only raise her shield to block Superman's thunderous blow. The invisible wave centered on the two of them spread from mid-air in all directions. The center of the two of them was still a long distance from the ground, but the aftermath of the shock still made an irregular round crater on the ground. Thea saw this scene and nodded secretly. Not to mention Diana's background, Superman's strength did not exceed her expectations by much. If her future enemies were at this level, although she might not be able to defeat them, it would not be too dangerous. However, Milady also remembered that Superman and Luthor in the original spacetime had said that he had never used his full strength in a battle. Many years of living on Earth, rational, moral, legal, and all kinds of messy things made him spontaneously shackle himself. It was difficult to judge where his true strength lay. Diana's situation was similar to Superman's. The Guardian silver bracelet provided her with a strong defense, but at the same time, it also restrained her own strength. Diana's real strength would increase by 100 times when the Guardian silver bracelet was unsealed. According to Thea's estimation, Diana would be able to kill gods like a child at that time. It could be said that they were two warriors fighting with shackles. Superman's was an artificial morality, and Diana's was a fear of her own life and the divine power of gods. Both sides did not want to cross their own bottom line. Although the battle was fierce, it was not fatal, which was why Thea did not object. "I am an Amazon warrior. I am the daughter of Zeus and Hippolyte," Diana shouted loudly, gradually falling into a disadvantageous position under Superman's fierce attack. She began to artificially raise her momentum. "I am someone's grandson, someone's son." This was a very classical way of fighting. Many legendary heroes had this habit in battle. If the enemy was also a person who respected tradition, then he had to remember the other party's family tree at this time. When he defeated the opponent, He could very pretentiously trample on the enemy while saying, "Someone's grandson, someone's son, someone was defeated by me." To some extent, this was a classical literary version of the family tree. Superman could read all the medical books on Earth in 5 minutes. He was not a muscle warrior, and his level of knowledge was very high. He did know this habit, but it was a little embarrassing for him, an alien, to say the name of his own father and grandfather in battle. Her taciturn response had weakened his stormy attacks by a little. Diana seized the opportunity, threw away her shield, and attacked Superman with the Vulcan's sword in one hand. Without the early advantage, Superman's combat intuition was still terrifyingly high. However, combat intuition could not always be there. There was a lot of randomness in it, and it was not as reliable as real martial arts. After receiving Diana's punch head-on, Superman did not notice the other party's feint, and was hit on the shoulder by the sword, leaving a shallow blood groove. The two sides paused tacitly. Without kryptonite, and without falling into a weakened state, this was the first time Superman was injured in battle. This also made him realize that the body of steel was just an adjective. Nothing was absolute, and nothing was unbreakable. Amazing, you are a powerful warrior. Superman's energy circulated slightly, and the wound healed instantly. Only the torn clothes still reminded him that there was a wound here before. Come on. Diana saw that he was fine, and there was no fear in her heart, only excitement. Finally, there was a guy who was not afraid of her attack. Superman had the same idea as her, and the dignified look in his eyes was a little more. Chapter 463. Bang! The two switched positions in the air, and Diana once again saw an opening. The silver bracelet was imbued with immense power, and she punched Superman in the stomach. Even though he had a body of steel, this punch was enough to make brother Superman bleed. Thea glanced at Louise without batting an eyelid. She didn't know if this punch would affect their happy life in the future. Superman realized that he was at a disadvantage when it came to fighting moves, and he instantly changed the rhythm of his attacks. He began to use his powerful physique, and instead of pursuing any moves, he used pure strength to drive his speed. His fists rained down on Diana like raindrops. As he became more serious, the frequency of his punches increased, and the yellow sun's energy absorbed in his body naturally overflowed. On this dim planet, it looked like a sun that was gradually heating up and glowing. It was getting brighter and brighter, as if a wheel of fire had risen from the horizon. Diana also refused to show weakness. She threw away the fire god's sword, and her silver bracelet of protection sensed her fighting spirit. Although it was not unsealed, a steady stream of divine power began to fill her body. She did not have the scorching heat of the sun, only the belief of protection. Streaks of silver light appeared on the surface of her body and hid in her body, and she attacked Superman. One of them shone brightly, and each of his punches carried great power. The other was like a bright moon in the sky, unparalleled in defense, and could also mix in a fatal counterattack. After fighting in the air for less than a minute, they landed on the ground. Aerial combat was not suitable for this kind of attack. Every time Superman threw a few punches, Diana only needed to fly back a few centimeters to make Superman's attacks useless. Similarly, Diana's attacks were the same, and it really went against the original intention of sparring. Entering the ground battle, Diana's martial arts skills were finally displayed to the extreme. Each of her attacks carried a burst of cold light, bright and hazy. In a short period of time, Superman took 2 punches and 1 kick. What a pity! Thea sighed. What's a pity? Even though Thea had cast farsight on Louise, she was still dazzled. As an amateur, she really couldn't see anything. Thea blurted out that it was a pity. She only thought that it was unwise for Diana to give up the divine sword to compete with Superman. However, she also knew that it was reasonable to give up the divine sword after giving up the shield. For Diana, it was better to be empty-handed than to play with a one-handed sword. In the future, the fire deity would forge 2 one-handed swords for her. Perhaps dual-wielding was her future path? Thea, can you do this as well? You're a deity too? Louise asked with lingering fear as she watched the 2 of them dig trenches in the ground and open holes in the mountain from time to time. The eldest young mistress laughed. This question was too unprofessional. What should she say? Bragging that she was a demigod would be too much of a show-off, and there was no need for that. I'm just an ordinary earthling. I can't compare to them, ha. Louise rolled her eyes at a place where she couldn't see. Normal people? Who are you kidding? I'm an ordinary earthling, okay? Especially when Superman and the others were fighting farther and farther away. Thea could only control the materialization under her feet to catch up with them. This further confirmed Louise's thoughts. She was the only ordinary person among the 4 of them. As the energy used by the 2 of them increased, the destruction of the planet began to show. Superman had already scanned the area with his supervision early in the battle. This planet did not even have many microbes, let alone intelligent life. He had no qualms about destroying it. Diana was even more so. As long as she was not an earthling, the life and death of extraterrestrials had nothing to do with her. Even if the planet was destroyed, the few of them could go back. They had no qualms about fighting. Diana exerted force with both hands, lifting up an entire piece of the ground and throwing it at Superman. Such a crude way of fighting suited Superman's intentions perfectly. He raised his right fist and jumped up, punching through the flying object. At the same time, not to be outdone, he looked left and right. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He flew to the side, exerted force with both hands, and pulled up a mountain that was dozens of meters tall and weighed hundreds of tons from the ground. When he raised it above his head and was about to throw it, he suddenly noticed something. His eyes could not help but look into the distance. Diana reacted quickly. She realized that something had happened and stopped attacking. Seeing Superman lifting a mountain like a gorilla, Thea wanted to laugh. When she saw the change in their expressions, she also noticed that something was wrong. She switched to her supervision and looked in the direction Superman was looking. After searching for 1,500 kilometers, Thea finally noticed something strange. 2 alien spaceships landed on the surface of the planet one after another. The first spaceship was equivalent to the crash of a fugitive, and the second spaceship was the pursuers if nothing unexpected happened. Little death-courting expert landed on the ground with Louise. She did not know what had happened. She looked at Superman nervously. What's the matter? Diana could see very far. 1,500 kilometers was also within her range. She just needed to fly high. Thea truthfully told the 2 girls what she had seen. Louise was even more certain that the capitalists were not telling the truth. How could an earthling like you see 1,500 kilometers away? Superman put down the mountain regretfully. It was tiring to keep lifting it. What should I do? Or should they meddle in other people's business? Did they say anything? Can you hear them? Thea asked Superman. As the only man present, Superman listened seriously. He was a little speechless. I can hear them, but I don't understand their language. So troublesome. Thea let out a long breath. Even running to a deserted planet to watch a show could cause such a drama. This proved that Superman and Diana were very lucky to be the children of the world. If she was here alone, she could just retreat. Diana might be able to take care of the matter in front of her. Even if she was thousands of kilometers away, she might not care. Unfortunately, Superman and his wife were also in the group. These 2 were enthusiastic people. They were the kind of people who could not sleep if they did not take care of other people. Thea could only bite the bullet and join in. She glanced at the 30 or so people in front and behind. They were all armed with technological weapons, but she could not tell how strong they were. She could understand a few mainstream alien languages. If she really could not, she could translate through the light ring. The only thing that limited her was that her hearing was not that good. She softly chanted an incantation and released Morgan Le Fay's reality simulation. She then released a water mirror spell, projecting the movements and voices of the other people onto the mirror. It was convenient for her to translate in real time. She saw a group of people chasing after the person in front. The person in the back shouted from time to time. The person in front was tightly covered. There seemed to be lead in his clothes. It was impossible to tell who he was. Thea listened for a while and smiled bitterly. She could not understand. She could only take out the light ring. After listening for a while, she said to them, "The person in front is the Princess of Tamarin. She's called Corian. The people behind are the soldiers sent by her sister to kill her." Chapter 464. The vendetta within the royal family, the antagonism between family members, and the influence of Earth's movies and TV series made it easy for them to analyze some of the inside stories here. Everyone could see the intentions in each other's eyes. Save them. Superman was worried about leaving Louise in this desolate place. However, neither he nor Diana had the ability to take his girlfriend and fly at high speed while protecting her safety. The big burden was handed over to Thea again, who asked her to have so many tricks up her sleeve. She conjured a plane and carried her straight into the distance. 1,500 kilometers passed in the blink of an eye for them. They arrived at the scene of the battle almost at the same time. They saw Princess Corleone, known as Spark, turning back to attack the enemy from time to time. Her palms would shoot out some kind of green energy shockwave, but she seemed to be injured. Her steps were messy, and it was difficult for her to aim. She was being pushed back by the enemy and was about to be defeated. The four idlers descended from the sky, which made them a little puzzled. Without supervision and superhearing, they thought this was a deserted planet. They didn't expect to meet intelligent life forms. Thea and Louise sat in the plane. It was yellow and they couldn't see what it was. Superman and Diana's attire was very conspicuous, especially when Diana was holding a shield and a sword. It automatically made the enemy think of some backward civilization. The leaders looked at each other and sneered. In their hearts, these guys who had descended from the sky were most likely the natives of this planet. They were the kind of primitive people who only had strength but didn't know what technology was. Princess Spark, who was not far away, had the same thought. She hurriedly shouted for the four to run. Although they didn't speak the same language, Superman could still judge from the other party's behavior that the one in front who told them to run was a good person, and the group behind who raised their technological weapons were bad guys. There was nothing to say. Fight. He was already a little angry when a good battle was interrupted. There was no need for him to tolerate this group of ignorant people. However, he still had a sense of propriety. He didn't even use 30% of his true strength. Diana was also unhappy with the way the pursuers looked at her. She also rushed forward unhappily. By the time Thea wanted to help, she discovered that the enemies were already lying on the ground. The two of them played around and defeated all the pursuers. Amidst the wailing sounds, the only one left standing was Princess Starfire. Princess Spark took off her helmet, revealing a head of red hair and orange skin. If one ignored her skin color, this woman could be considered a great beauty according to Earth's aesthetic standards. Thea translated a few sentences, but she soon realized that the princess was too talkative. She was a little annoyed by her repeated questions. "Why don't you just learn it yourselves?" Using the language function of the light ring, he projected the vocabulary of Tamarin's language in the form of a 3D projection in the air for the two top students to learn on the spot. Superman and Diana looked at each other and seemed to find this very interesting. At the same time, they started to remember. It turned out that Superman's father was far-sighted. The all-rounder Kryptonian's ability was simply unparalleled. Even the scholar-type Kryptonians couldn't learn as fast as him. Tamarin's language, which was much more difficult than Earth's language, was mastered by Superman in less than 30 seconds. Diana relied on Athena's wisdom as a blessing. It didn't mean that she was Athena. Although she was also learning with all her might, she was still slower than Superman by more than 2 minutes. Although he was a little slower, mastering an alien language in 2 minutes still surprised Louise. She felt that the gap between her and Clark was a little too big. Don't tell me you learn things very quickly too? While Superman and Diana went to ask Starfire, she whispered to Thea. Thea was now approachable and seemed to be full of hope. She was a completely different person from the cold and arrogant person she was when she was being interviewed. To be honest, Louise felt that it was easy to deal with her now. Vaguely understanding what she meant, Thea chuckled. I don't have such a strong learning ability. It took me 5 years to go from college to a doctorate. Louise nodded to herself. Although going from college to a doctorate in 5 years was quite an exaggeration, it was still within her acceptable range. Superman didn't finish off the enemies on the ground. Starfire was also a typical righteous person who didn't want to kill her own people. After Superman invited her to stay on Earth temporarily, she thought about it and agreed. With the battle interrupted, the few of them lost interest. Thea directly teleported back home and helped Princess Starfire find a place to stay. Only then did they say goodbye to each other. Is there something you need? Diana asked softly after everyone left. There is something. A guy who I'm not sure if he's a friend or an enemy left me a message. I have to go and help him, Thea said with a gloomy expression. Knowing that she didn't want to go into detail, Diana didn't press her. The two kissed and said, "Come back soon." Thea nodded, put on the yellow light ring, and flew out of the atmosphere. When she came to an uninhabited planet, she opened the communication channel of the yellow light ring. A 3D projection that was as tall as a human appeared. It was Sinisto. After a uniform input of energy, the projection began to speak. Thea Quinn, when you see this video, I will no longer be in this world. Although working with you isn't pleasant, it won't be annoying. The projection paused for a moment. It seemed that the original owner's emotions were fluctuating while recording this message. I don't know who will do this to me. Is it the Guardians, Hal Jordan, or someone from the Yellow Light Corps? Everything is unknown. I've experienced glory and was once the center of attention. I was the kind of hero that the Green Lights thought of. Now I'm considered a traitor, a tyrant. These are all trivial matters. I only know that I have to protect my home planet, Kaluga. That's a responsibility that's higher than my life, higher than anything else. The Yellow Lantern Corps is shrouded in fear. When I'm not in this world, their existence will destroy my home planet. Help me take care of Kruga. From today onwards, the Yellow Lantern Corps will be yours. Arkilo and Lisa Dracker will pledge their loyalty to you. They are elites who can control fear. You have to be careful of Mungo's son. He is a man with great ambition but little talent. My departure will definitely give him an opportunity to take advantage of. I've never been wrong about people. I know you'll help me. After the video ended, Sia snorted in displeasure. Sinisto was asking for help, yet he had put himself on such a high pedestal. He didn't even say a word of thanks from beginning to end. However, he did know Thea very well. She really wouldn't reject such a request that was almost like a dying wish. Strange, if he's no longer in this world, why didn't that part of the yellow light ring return to me? Did it blow up directly, or did someone tamper with it? Her first suspect was the little blue guardians who had lived for hundreds of millions of years. These guys had unfathomable strength. It was hard to say if they were controlling something behind the scenes. Chapter 465. The planet controlled by Jared was not far from Korriga. Thea ordered the official members of the Light Ring, the Dead Man, and Fiora to meet up with her there. She tried to find Sinisto's last traces based on the faint connection she had with the lamp ring. This was the wreckage of a planet. Countless cosmic dust was floating here, and from time to time, there were boulders that could not bear the weight and broke into pieces under the influence of gravity. Thea followed the guidance of the light ring and gradually approached this area. There were still many traces of battle here, and emotional energy was still filling this place. On one side was the green light of courage, and on the other side was the yellow light of fear. The green light was not unfamiliar to her. It was the one that she had worn for a short time, the one that Hal Jordan had inherited from Aubin Sue. The yellow light was even more familiar. It came from the same source as her light ring. It was Sinisto. She looked into the distance and did not see any corpse. When she was about to explore deeper, a figure suddenly flashed not far from her side. The white-haired, blue-skinned guardian wearing a red suit and a white robe was looking at her thoughtfully. Only one? Thea looked around blatantly and found that there was only one guardian in front of her. She put away the teleportation gem in her hand. She nodded slightly and said, "Respected guardian, what alarmed you and made you leave the main planet of Oath that you have guarded for hundreds of millions of years? Hello, Earthling, we meet again. You can call me Gantz." The little blue guardian said expressionlessly. It's him? Gantz could be said to be the only guardian who still had feelings. Maybe it was because he was kind by nature, or maybe it was because the ring of the first lantern warrior Huarong was sealed in his body, so his feelings were not completely erased. This guy could be said to be the only guardian left who could be dealt with. Thea followed his advice and said, "Lord Gantz, is there anything I can help you with?" She could not see the depths of their strength on OUA that day. Now that she was a demigod, she finally had some understanding of the strength of these guys. Strong. Really strong. She just used an imperceptible spirit power to sweep the edge of his body, and it was easily bounced off by an indescribable force. The guardian named Ganser looked at her blankly as if he didn't know. Thea gritted her teeth. No one she knew was as strong as him. Although in the original spacetime, Gonda boasted that Spectre was not as good as him and was pressed to the ground by Spectre 3 minutes later, his level was indeed higher than the current Thea. Thea felt that she had to at least become a new god or fuse with the Parallax monster to be able to compete with him. Gonsei didn't mind her little tricks. Perhaps it was because of the billions of years that they had spent together, but there were too many people who wanted to test them. They were all immune to it. Do you think Sinisto did the right thing? He used his own order, his own understanding, to plunge the planet into a vortex of fear. Hal Jordan disagreed with his actions, and the two fought. You and Hal are both from Earth. What is your point of view? Thea really didn't think about this question. Half an hour ago, Kaluja's explosion had nothing to do with her. She was as busy as a spinning top every day. How could she have the time to think about it blindly? After thinking about it seriously, she had to admit that the various philosophical works on Earth were very rich. Predecessors had already come to a conclusion on this matter. She just had to modify it slightly and add in some of her own understanding to become a new theory. Sinisto used his own power to establish the order of the planet. He enforced the law and judged the people on the planet. He required everyone on the planet to live according to his plan. From birth to death, he arranged everything neatly. Earth has a special term for this kind of thing. It's called a utopia. It means a utopia that can't be done. No one on Earth does this. Without the intervention of supernatural forces, the ancient sages only tried this utopia in some small colonies. Reality told them that it doesn't work at all. Gonda was just listening in a daze. Now that she had caught his attention, the powerful guardian couldn't help but ask, why? Freedom. People don't have freedom or the right to choose. They lose their life goals, expectations, and hope. Everyone falls into numbness and trifles, wasting their time doing nothing. Hope? Gonda muttered to himself. Thea's words were getting smoother and smoother. She didn't care if he was listening or not. She continued, "The ancient sages of Earth gave up the utopian idea. We are walking on a free and unrestrained path. Let me give you a negative example. Krypton. You know about Krypton, right?" Gonda nodded. He knew about such a famous planet. He also had a premonition of what Thea was going to say next. Krypton has the best genetic modification technology in the universe. They screen the babies at the embryonic stage and use a huge algorithm to calculate the future direction of the child. Before they are born, they have already determined their future direction. Every Kryptonian understands their mission when they can remember. Like a machine, they do their own things in a cycle. Their planet was eventually destroyed. Only one Kryptonian who gave birth naturally escaped. His parents gave him the right to choose. The glory of humanity is now sprinkled on Earth. This is the birth of a great soul. Gonda seemed to be thinking about the truth behind her words. Hope, is it? Hope can change life. Only hope can save them? He muttered to himself. Slowly, he seemed to understand some truth. There was a hint of emotion on his emotionless face. He stepped back emotionlessly and threw a residue wrapped in energy to Thea before disappearing. "This is the remaining part of Sinisto's ring. I have collected it. You should be able to use its power. Sinisto was only banished to the anti-material world. Don't worry. According to the records of the Book of Ura, his story has not ended. Take care, Earthlings with ideas. We will meet again." It was not until this person disappeared without a trace that Sia looked at the ball of energy. She was not worried about Sinisto. This old man first served the Green Lantern, then the Yellow Lantern, then the Green Lantern, and then the Yellow Lantern again. In the records of the Green Lantern history, he seemed to have returned to the Green Lantern for retirement. Sinisto's life had been changing between Green Lantern, Yellow Lantern, and White Lantern for a short period of time. It could be said that his story had just begun. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as having 3 ups and downs. Gonda kept talking about hope. Was this a sign that he was going to establish a Blue Lantern? Thea shrank her neck. In all honesty, she was just talking nonsense. There was no special purpose. Chapter 466. The Guardians who had lived for hundreds of millions of years did not understand the thoughts of intelligent life and forcibly used their way of thinking to interpret the world. It could be said that 70% of the major events in the universe were created by these little blue people according to their own ideas. Day did not understand the darkness of night. Different levels of life had different ideas and heights. Thea did not know what she said that resonated with Gonda so much. The timeline of this world was already very messy, and now with her messing things up, she did not know what would happen in the future. She would deal with the future in the future. She urgently needed to deal with the remnant of the lamp ring in her hand. She found a cave on a nearby planet and began to examine it carefully. The more she looked, the more distressed she felt. Hal Jordan and Sinisto were both idiot. The energy impact of their love and hate had actually caused the lamp ring to explode. Thea let go of her lamp ring and began to use fear to communicate with the energy in the remnant. Now, her control over her mental strength had long surpassed that of these lanterns. They were all one-off businesses. Everyone's mental strength was what they were born with. Without training, it was as much as it should be. It would almost never grow after the day they were born. They themselves lacked mental power and relied on the so-called willpower to control emotions. Those with strong willpower like Hal Jordan could finish his apprenticeship in 3 days and beat his master to the anti-material world in 5 days. Other professions had a step-by-step process that was easy to learn but difficult to master. Lanterns did not need to accumulate experience at all. In fact, there was not much difference between a lifetime of work and 3 days of work. The difference was obvious at a glance. This was because they did not have the help of mental power and could only rely on their own willpower to withstand the emotional impact. Thea now felt that these little blue guardians were pretending. With just a little contact, Thea could tell that Gantha had cultivated mental power or some kind of higher internal power. They knew that mental power had a promoting effect on the lanterns, but they pretended not to know and watched the lanterns use their own will to break in with the world's will. The result was self-evident. Sinisto, Hal Jordan, and the other strong-willed men were driven to the brink of death by them. It was evident that they had killed them. However, it was understandable that Thea would also hold back when she did things, but she would not go overboard. It was not a matter of holding back, but at the very least, they would hold back 7 or 8 times. The communication between the ring and residue was not smooth. The 2 rings had been separated for too long, and residue did not agree with Thea very much. Now it had to add an update. Unfortunately, Thea was not a regular lantern. She was not an ordinary person who could not do anything after taking off her ring. He directly incited the fire magic to smelt the remaining wills. If he was happy, they could obey him. If he was unhappy, they had to obey him. She might not be able to deal with Gancelli, but if Thea couldn't deal with this ring, then she would have wasted so many years of effort. She had even mixed a trace of power of will into it. The remnants of the lamp ring could no longer withstand it, and yellow particles kept flying into her lamp ring. The originally pale yellow lamp ring was gradually darkening. The weak resistance was suppressed by force, and the strong resistance was transformed by power of will. The speed of fusion was gradually increasing. Thea tried to imprint her spiritual imprint into the ring during the fusion period. The ring almost did not resist, and it acquiesced to her ownership. With this imprint, her control over the ring had deepened a bit. Even if Sinisto jumped out now and shouted himself hoarse, the ring would not listen to him. If you want the yellow ring, you have to remake it yourself. After 4 hours of hard work, all the residue was absorbed, and the color depth exceeded Sinisto's that day. The ring exuded a golden sun-like light, and Thea immediately closed her eyes to feel it. Materialization, protective shield, high-speed flight, wormhole, these basic functions were all there. Her original ring's functions of phase shift, space warp, teleportation, and Kryptonian recharge were all retained. Instilling fear, which originally occupied half of the abilities of both of them, was also completed. However, she could already use this ability with magic, so it was not very meaningful to her now. Energy twin, environment playback, invisibility, light refraction, cell regeneration, energy absorption, and other functions were all retained. The energy twin function was not explained clearly, so she tried it on the spot. The lamp ring would release an energy clone the size of a person at a designated location. When the energy clone was in existence, the body would remain still, while the energy clone could move at extremely high speed. After the emotional support was removed, the clone would return to the body, and all the knowledge it had learned would be transferred to the ring bearer. It seems to be a learning ability? Thea did not see how useful this clone was to her. It could not speak, and it was yellow all over. Anyone could tell that it was a fake person. The only advantage was that it could go to many dangerous places. The body stood outside, and the clone ignored all the traps and moved at high speed to start memorizing. After that, regardless of life or death, it would bring the knowledge to the body. It could be said that when the 2 rings were reunited, many of the functions that she had envied were now useless. Thea was not very used to wearing it every time she used it. She could cast spells at will, and it was much more convenient and faster than the lamp ring. Sigh, I'm already so strong. Thinking back to the original experience, the lamp ring was like a step to the sky for ordinary people, but for her, it was just icing on the cake. The emotion amplification function of the lamp ring was still affected by the broken ring. Thea's original ring could amplify emotions by 150 times. Now that the two rings were reunited, the amplification did not exceed 240 times, which was 30% less than she expected. Calculating the time, most of the dead people had already arrived. Thea did not waste any time and tried the wormhole of the new ring. It was faster and more stable, and the speed of flying at full speed could exceed the speed of light. The first yellow ring in the world was indeed worthy of its reputation. This kind of power and speed was really intoxicating. Thea could not fly so fast by herself, and she was only the first yellow ring. Just like Lantern Number 1, regardless of whether it was the Rainbow Lantern or not, he directly obtained the first lantern ring in the universe that gathered all the primitive emotions in the universe. His power was instantly raised to the peak of the true God, and he could easily change history and reality. It could be seen that the impact of emotional energy on one's will was simply crushing. Thea did not want to be a slave to emotions, but she did not give up eating for fear of choking. The lamp ring was just a tool to her. If it was not for the fact that she automatically changed into the tights every time she wore it, she might have been able to use it a few more times. Now it was dispensable. When she arrived at Gruder's planet, the three official members of the Yellow Lantern Corps, Deadman, Fiora, and Gruder, were waiting for her. Sia briefly explained the situation. Taking into account that Sinisto had recruited a large number of soldiers in order to fight against the Green Lanterns of the 3,600 sectors in the later stages of the war, the current Yellow Lantern Corps of Corriga had at least 1,000 people. More than 1,000 temporary workers who had not been confirmed by the Book of Parallax. Chapter 467. One man against 1,000 men sounded very majestic, and the visual impact was very strong. However, it was best not to use it if the difference in strength was not as great as the difference between heaven and earth. There were countless strong people in history, such as Darkseid and Thanos. They were all arrogant and brave, but they were all pushed down by the righteous side and rubbed against the ground. Although Thea did not think much of the Yellow Lantern soldiers, she might not be able to win against hundreds and thousands of them. Unity is strength. This was applicable in 99% of situations. It was unrealistic to attack by force. Kruga's civilization level was not low. Even if it was not comparable to Krypton, which was a level 8 civilization, it was at least level 6. Unlike Earth, where aliens could come and go as they pleased, it was like a market. Kruga had a defense system. Although there was a large population on Kruga, their civilization level was only slightly higher than the natives. Space warships were out of the question. Fiora had gathered some neutral mercenaries in the universe and had a few warships, but the character of the mercenaries was hard to predict. They could be used in a favorable battle, but with such a large number of enemies, it was possible that they would defect to the enemy directly. The enemy had more people, and their defense system was intact. They had fewer people, and they had to attack. There was only one choice in front of Sia, and that was to organize a small team to carry out a surprise attack, as had been done countless times in movies. She instructed Fiora to get the few people on Earth. They could not fight in space, but their fighting ability on the ground was off the charts. She began to contact Sinisto's supporters in Kruga. The more guides there were, the better. The first person she contacted was Lisa Draka, who claimed to have a certain precognitive ability. Unfortunately, she could not get through. She also knew Akiro, who was mentioned by Sinisto. He was a tall and burly blue-skinned alien. He was the training officer of the Yellow Lantern Corps. Akiro had once gone to Earth alone to gain Thea's approval. He was loyal and honest. Although he was a barbaric guy, Thea had a good impression of him. Unfortunately, she could not contact this guy either. Needless to say, it must be because of Sinisto's disappearance. His ambitious subordinates had defeated his loyal subordinate. She could not contact the members of the Light Ring. Fortunately, she had other means to contact others. Asona, can you hear me? Telescopic vision, supervision, imaging technique, and the light refraction and projection function of the light ring. Spells, abilities, and the 3 abilities of the light ring were integrated together and began to communicate across light years. Who? The purple alien woman on the other side of the camera was a bit surprised. She stared at the water curtain that suddenly appeared in front of her and asked tentatively, "Thank God you're still alive. I'm Thea, remember? I'm Sinisto's." Thea thought for a long time. Was she related to Sinisto? It was almost unrelated. "I'm Sinisto's colleague. We've met once before." Thea could not think of anything good to say, so she could only give a vague answer. The purple alien woman nodded calmly. "I have a deep impression of you. Sinisto complained many times that you took away his supreme power." Thea almost vomited blood. She knew that Sinisto had said something bad about her behind her back. Although this woman was not a member of the Light Ring, she was the highest commander of the Korriga Defense Force. At the same time, she was also Sinisto's lover after his wife died. The two must have talked about her after they did something indescribable. That was why this woman had a deep impression of her. Having an impression was better than not having one. "How's the situation in Korriga?" "Sinisto left me a message. Is there anything I can help you with?" The purple woman, Asona, said stiffly. "Korriga does not need another dictator. Sinisto betrayed his people and betrayed me. Korriga does not need any lanterns, green or yellow. We don't need any." After that, she threw something that looked like a weapon at the water curtain. However, it was useless. Thea's water curtain was invisible. If she did not cancel it, no one could do anything about it. After throwing things for a long time, Asona threw a tantrum and looked at the water curtain with a serious face. "What do you want?" "I want to fulfill a promise. Or rather, help Sinisto get rid of his Yellow Lantern Corps and liberate Korriga." "And after that?" "After that?" Thea thought for a while. "The unqualified Light Ring members will be stripped of their rings and sent back to where they came from. I'll take the rest with me. In the future, Earth would be the center of the universe. Other than Sinisto, no one would care about a planet like Korriga." This answer was out of Asona's expectations. She was a very decisive woman. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me find a secret room. I want to take the team directly to Korriga." As the person in charge of the planet's military force, Asona immediately thought of a few words. She did not know that Thea did not have enough manpower. She only thought that the other party was not going to launch a large-scale attack. This was very much in line with her intentions. "Okay." Asona agreed without hesitation. Before ending the call, Thea told her, "Collect information about the Corps. See you later." After that, she began to set up a long-distance teleportation circle. The Light Ring's foundation had increased greatly, so there was no need to abandon it. At the same time, she was also worried that Asona would do something bad to them. The teleportation circle was reinforced with magic and emotional energy at the same time. It could last for a long time, and the channel was stable. Without a specific method, even a nuclear bomb could not destroy it. The few people from Earth quickly arrived. The somewhat awkward electric lady still put on her imitation light ring. The suggestion spell was constantly affecting her. Death Knell and Poison Ivy were fine, but this was the first time Father Midnight had come to an alien planet. Especially when he saw many primitive natives carrying the chubby Grutter to meet up with them, he was even more surprised. "Is this guy also my companion?" Fiora stood alone beside Thea and watched her make the teleportation circle. Death Knell and Father Midnight came from a mixed background, so they had more in common. After that, Grutter joined their conversation. On the other side, Death Knell was bragging with Poison Ivy and Electric Lady. They also brought some people with them. There were alien subordinates recruited by Fiora and native warriors controlled by Grutter. Death Knell also brought more than 100 elite soldiers and his daughter, Rose Wilson, who was also a powerful warrior. Another thing that caught Thea's attention was that Death Knell had recruited a psychic. She was an earth lady who could control soil and rock. However, she was too young to be used as the main force. As for her subordinates, she did not think too much. Those who could catch her eye were all powerful people. It was normal for them to want to develop their forces. Just like what she said to Gantha, there was only motivation when there was hope. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.